Wedding attendees. Did you ever see one get cancelled mid-ceremony? In 6th grade, my entire class went to our teacher's wedding. My teacher was the bride and about 3/4 of the way down the aisle when the groom decided he just couldn't do it. He walked off to the side, and at first my teacher and her father didn't notice and kept walking, smiling radiantly. There was about a minute of really solid confusion, last-minute cold feet, bathroom emergency, before everyone realized what was going on. My teacher was whisked out of the church and an announcement was made that there wasn't going to be a wedding. This happened the 2nd or 3rd week of June. She didn't come back for the last week of school. Ugly situation. Not called off, just relocated. The bride wanted everything to be lit by candlelight as it was much more romantic. Well, of course, something, a wall hanging or tapestry of some sort, caught fire, set off the fire alarm, and everyone had to evacuate the church. The ceremony was continued and finished in the parking lot with a couple of fire trucks in the background. I worked at a bar when I was at university. 2 guys came in dressed to the nines. I asked what they were doing that day, and they told me the wedding they were going to was cancelled. The maid of honor had been sleeping with the groom. One of the other bridesmaids had known about it for some time, but decided the best time to tell her was the morning of the wedding. A co-worker of the groom got super drunk, stood up and announced she had been boinking the groom for the past 6 months. This was right before the bride walked down the aisle. The bride's cousin had a sudden and unexpected fatal heart attack. Took the entire family a month to recover. Bride and groom had a small ceremony afterwards. God, what a drama queen. Just had to take the spotlight away from their happy day, didn't they? Some people. And yes, the narrator is almost certainly going to hell for that one, among many other reasons. Not a wedding I was attending, but my friend had told me about it. The ceremony was never called off, but in fact the bride and groom had decided not to get married, but just didn't tell their guests that. So my friend was telling me how this couple were having problems before the wedding. He would say going to their house was just awkward and that they'd always complain about each other to him. On the day of the wedding, everything from the outside looked normal. Bride and groom seemed like they were genuinely happy, but they'd decided to not actually get married. Like they never went and got a marriage certificate, so it was basically a fake wedding. They had a ceremony where they exchanged I do's, but it wasn't actually real. Guests bought gifts and everything for the couple, and they just cashed in and went their separate ways afterwards. My friend said he found out months after the wedding that the whole thing was just a hoax, and how they weren't giving any of the gifts back. I know it wasn't really called off mid-ceremony so much as the bride and groom secretly deciding to call it off, but I thought the story was wild enough to share. My father's first wedding. This took place in Colombia in the mid-1960s. He and his best friend were marrying sisters. They also happened to be my father's first cousins, which is an important factor. Anywho, this wedding became an impromptu family reunion since it was basically the same family on both sides. One of my father's relatives was a young man in the Colombian military at the time, and he was trying to entertain the family's children the morning of the wedding, while everyone was getting dressed and preparing. His chosen entertainment appeared to be playing around with deactivated hand grenades, apparently trying to drive a nail through them to mount them onto a board of wood. I don't know, that's just the story consensus. Turns out it wasn't properly deactivated and was a perfectly functioning grenade, and it performed its purpose admirably, instantly killing the young man and a lot of the family's collected youngest generation instantly. The wedding wasn't cancelled though, they just had a small quiet ceremony a few days later. Jesus. When I was in the Navy, scams for BAH, or Basic Allowance for Housing, were pretty rampant. I'm sure they still are to a certain extent. Basically, the base pay you receive in the military isn't that much. If you're married or you have kids, however, you get BAH, which is a tax-free chunk of change the government gives you every month so you can house your dependents. How much you receive is based off the zip code where your dependents physically reside. So if I'm stationed in Norfolk, but my wife and kids are living in Boulder, Colorado, then we get the BAH for Boulder, Colorado, and I live on the ship or in the barracks. It's fairly common, and the sailors who do this are referred to as geographical bachelors. Okay, so with all the setup out of the way, I was shipmates with a guy who was a complete sleaze. He was also bilking the Navy out of BAH for many years. He was turned in multiple times, but he kept getting away with it because, at the end of the day, it's very difficult to prove that you're only married for the BAH. Nobody says that it has to be a healthy marriage, Nobody says it has to be a marriage based on love. He had been married to an older woman, like in her 80s, living in San Francisco for the past few years. San Francisco has some of the highest BAH rates, so he split it down the middle with her and they each took home a decent chunk of change. In exchange, she played along, let him list her home as his home, and for all legal matters, considered him her husband. Well, she died and he was bummed and a little angry that he was about to lose a big chunk of cash. So he went out and began seeking his next paper bride in a high BAH zip code. He settled on a working girl from New York City who was from some Eastern European country. To legitimize all of this, he had a wedding and invited numerous people from work to witness it. I went there because there was a promise of free food and he told us we didn't have to get him gifts. Easy day. About 5 minutes into the whole thing, she backs out. Apparently, she didn't fully understand what he was proposing. I think it was mainly a language barrier issue. She thought he just wanted someone to pretend to be his wife. Like hang on his arm at a party and say she was Mrs. Crapbag. She didn't realize that he actually intended to legally marry her. Quite a bit of this was hashed out in front of all of us because they retreated to a private area where, as I understand it, he pleaded with her to go through with it and promised to remit her about $1,000 every month as long as she played ball. After an hour of begging and pleading, she left. We ate the food, had a good laugh, and went about our lives. The guy also found himself a proper paper wife and began bilking BAH again before getting booted from the Navy for something completely unrelated. I was told the bride never showed up because someone was having cold feet. The worst part was I was a young kid at the time and couldn't understand why someone would break off their engagement to a person they loved just because their feet were cold. It took me years to realize it was a saying. Why doesn't she just put some socks on and get on with it? My mum's friend was dating a man with a drinking problem. When he asked her to marry him, she said she would marry him if he never had another drink again. He agreed to give up the sauce for her. The night before the wedding, his friends threw him a bachelor party with alcohol and he drank. When he walked down the aisle, he was staggering a bit and she noticed. "Do you take this man to be your lawful wedded husband?" "No, I don't." They paused the wedding and went back with the priest for a counseling session. The priest came out and sent all the guests home. You know what? Good on her for sticking to her word. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Went to a cousin's wedding somewhere in Arkansas, maybe Little Rock. The wedding was put on pause when the priest started coughing uncontrollably, turned red, and fell into the altar. He lived, but there was a mild panic at the wedding when it was discovered that he had had viral meningitis, and literally the entire church full of people, let's call it 300 to be fair, had to go to the hospital and get tested and prophylactic treatments. Sounds like that wedding was the event of the century. The viral event. Actually, there's probably multiple stories like this during the pandemic alone. My cousin was getting married, and about 15 to 30 minutes before the wedding started, she was told that the man she was going to marry was arrested and had been on Washington's Most Wanted because of stuff he did either with a 14-year-old or was planning to do with a 14-year-old. He was like in his mid-20s, he ended up in prison for whatever it was, and right after she told everyone, the back porch broke right under her and her friends. It wasn't much of a drop, like 6 inches, but that's when she burst out in full-blown tears. It was a very awkward day, and honestly, if I wasn't there to witness it, I wouldn't believe it either. My wedding was close to being called off since my husband's grandfather was close to dying. Everyone told us to go through with the wedding anyway, so we did. My husband's grandfather ended up dying close to the moment we said, "I do," and my father-in-law got the call from the hospital shortly after we left the church. They told all of his family, but not us about it. So we had a lame wedding with everyone grieving but saying, "It's nothing," when we asked why no one was dancing. We got condolences the morning after and congratulations on his funeral. I could still cry when I think about all that stuff. It was 4 months ago. I should start off by saying I'm black, meaning a wedding will never start on time, and showing up on time, you're probably early. After 30 to 45 minutes of waiting, the old ladies from her church and my aunties started talking. Found out this was the second time they've tried to get married. The first time they tried to get married, he got into a bar fight the night before. We continued waiting for about 1.5 hours total, and finally they told everyone to go to the reception space because they're about to lose the church. I don't think anything of it. Whatever, there's food, let's go. During the reception, she does it all. The first dance, with my uncle, the dance with her dad, all the traditional wedding reception things. If it's not clear, this is all without her actual husband. Well, no one knows what to do at this point. They can't really give speeches because the groom isn't there, and it just seems awkward to celebrate something that, for the second time, didn't happen. Well, the bride decided to do a toast all on her own. She gets on the mic and tells everyone about how maybe she's just not meant to be married, how she's tried to get married to this guy, and it just isn't happening. Then she goes, "You know where this N-word is? Do y'all know where? Where this mother fricker is? He's in frickin' jail because of his dumb groomsman letting him drive home from the fricking bachelor party and he got a DUI. So yeah, he's in fricking jail and we've been trying to get him out. There was no third time and no Prince Charming for her." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not called off, just interrupted. I was watching my friend's wife getting married. All was going well. Just as they were doing their photos, after being declared husband and wife, I leant against the wall to try and get a good photo, and I leaned on the light switches for the entire hall. All the lights went out, everyone was looking around, and thankfully no one else knew it was me, so in the confusion I tried to switch them back on. And they didn't come back on. Now their wedding photo album has some nicely lit photos and some that are slightly more edgy and dark. I've been filming weddings part-time for 7 years and I've only seen something like this 3 times. None of these were straight up called off though. One of the groomsmen accidentally dropped the wedding ring and it rolled down the elevator shaft. Ceremony was postponed for a little over an hour. Funny thing is, maintenance found the ring, and apparently the groomsman made up some bogus story to feed the bride. She had no idea what really happened. There was another one where the bridesmaid passed out due to heat stroke, and a third where a guest accidentally stepped on the couple's little dog, broke its spine, and had to be sent to the vet. The dog was like family, so the couple was MIA for almost 4 hours dealing with it. Must have been a real small dog. And that person must have been running or something. Me and my guys were asking ourselves, how the hell do you accidentally step on a dog? The wedding I was at still went ahead. The bride and groom were standing at the altar with the wooden rail in front. One of the groomsmen starts swaying, and over he goes, face planting, hitting the rail on the way down. He ended up with a broken nose and an ambulance was called and he was taken to hospital. The wedding still went on and everyone made the best of it, and we were happy for the bride and groom. Cut to the reception following, a little boy was running around like a mad thing, as kids do, and ran through a glass door. The ambulance was called, the child was taken to the hospital. He was okay. The marriage didn't last, though. You'd think after such a roller coaster of a wedding that their marriage would pretty much survive anything. Warts in the downstairs area. I'm not even joking. I was one of the groomsmen for my friend's wedding, and his family was super religious. I mean like Jonestown levels of religious. So he hadn't been intimate with his bride yet. So we were all waiting by the altar for the music to start and we were silently chatting. Now, one of the other groomsmen, he had dated her for about a year before they, the current groom and bride-to-be, got together. And he let loose the following statement to another groomsman. "Yeah, she's really sweet and all, but she gave me something fierce." And both the one he told that to and I asked him to elaborate a bit. And I'm sure she ended up giving him warts down there. We had maybe a good 3 minutes before the music started, and we all started telling the groom as fast as we could because he had a right to know if she hadn't told him. He had this look to him like he didn't want to believe it, but he slowly walked down the center aisle to go ask his bride if all of this was true. Now, when he gets up, his parents follow him because they think he's getting cold feet. The rest I can only describe from my place at the front of the church. For the next 45 minutes we heard talking, then shouting, then crying on repeat. Then the dad came out and told everyone that the ceremony was going to be postponed. It was a small ceremony, so we were all just scratching our heads and we left. We all then got a call 2 hours or so later that the wedding was off indefinitely. Apparently the groom's parents didn't want him marrying someone who wasn't a virgin, let alone with a transmissible disease. We gave him some space for a few days, and after a while he filled us in on some of the details. Most of that wasn't important, but the part that really punched me in the feelings was when he told us about how the bride had to tell him and his parents in her damn wedding gown that she got the thing from something that took place against her will. The groom didn't call off the wedding, the parents did. I still think they're absolutely warty pricks to this day. To my knowledge though, the former couple still talks to each other, so there's that. My good lord. Well, to further add to the narrator is going to hell pile of evidence, fundamentalist religious people just kinda suck. If the guy was gonna marry her anyway, literally warts and all, standing in the way is just crappy and evil. Get bent, family of the groom. We had just finished the ceremony and everyone was heading into the building to start dinner. I found my seat near the bride and started to chat with her friends. I saw the bride sit down at the table next to me and say, "I think I'm going to have a seizure." And she did. Fortunately, myself and a few other people had medical training and she turned out perfectly fine. After the EMS left, she stayed and finished the night by dancing and having fun. She actually had a history of seizures and had neglected to tell anyone or take her medicine this week. My best friend's wedding got called off. I was the master of ceremonies. His brother was his best man, so I was in a very unique way able to experience this beautiful event. I arrived about 2 hours before the ceremony was to start to chat to the caterer and check the microphone and speakers. As I was chatting to the DJ and just generally checking things out, I noticed every once in a while a waiter would walk by the bar with a tray of wine, beer, and shooters. I didn't think anything of it though. As time got closer to the ceremony at the church, people had arrived and everyone was having snacks and drinks outside the reception venue. Both the church and reception were on a vineyard, so they were right next to each other. The bride was delayed for a long time, something I couldn't understand since she was getting ready in the guest house right there on the property. In any event, we finally got the go-ahead that the bride was on the way to the church. They conveyed her on a golf cart, so we started getting everyone seated and ready for the show. I was standing at the entrance of the church to close the door after the bride entered, so I got to see everything transpire in all its glory. The bride climbed off the cart, and as she was walking towards the stairs with her father, she tripped and face-planted right there on the steps of the church. As this is in an agricultural setting, you can imagine that there's a lot of dirt everywhere, and accordingly, her dress was filthy. At this stage, I simply thought she fell over by accident and I ran over to help her get up. She dusted herself off, said she was fine, and continued in her usual fashion to enter the church. It's then that my suspicions started peaking. I noticed she was wobbling from side to side as she walked, but thought maybe she got hurt in the fall? As she started walking down the aisle, however, she was stopping to greet people in the aisles, making jokes, pulling faces, giving people thumbs up. It immediately hit me. She was hammered. By the time she got to the groom, he just stood there with his jaw open. He could immediately tell what was happening. She was standing there next to him in the church right in front of everyone, swaying from side to side and slurring. It was painful and cringe-inducing to witness. The best part is, she insisted the wedding proceed and that everything was hunky-dory. The more the groom wanted to suspend proceedings for a bit, she insisted they proceed. Then she exploded at him in the church in front of everyone, shouting and accusing him of ruining her wedding day, and then she stormed out of the church crying, and wouldn't you know it, she bumped into a bench in the aisle and went flying to the ground again. Wedding dresses are not made for running, and they're especially not made for drunken running. People helped her up and escorted her outside. The groom also left, and everyone just kind of sat there in silence. Since it was rather hot that day, we told everyone to go to the reception hall and have a drink, while the situation was being dealt with. The bride had been drinking the entire day, and those shooters and drinks I saw being carried from the bar were for her and her friends in the guest house. I inquired at the bar how much the bill was prior to people arriving, and was shocked to see that between her and 2 of her friends, they'd drunk 3 bottles of wine, 6 beers, 6 ciders, and a crap load of shooters ranging from tequila to Jägermeister. In any event, the bridezilla is now crying and throwing tantrums at the guest house, loud enough for everyone to hear at the reception. Apparently, she continued to drink some of the leftovers from the previous round of drinks. The groom came out to apologize to everyone and to say that the wedding wouldn't be going ahead, but that everyone must please eat and drink and have some fun since everything had already been paid and catered for. I made the announcement and I joined the groom and his family, who had flown in specially for the wedding, for a drink and to come to grips with what just happened. Many people, especially from the bride's side, just went home. Meanwhile, bridezilla was crying and drinking away in the guest house with her bridesmaids. After about an hour or so, with many people having left, she stormed out of the guest house and screamed at the groom for ruining her wedding again, except this time she's even drunker. She storms off with her friends and eventually we see them climb in a car and off they go. We finished our food and had some drinks and called it a night. I drive home with the groom and his folks, only to discover when we got to the complex where he and bridezilla were staying that she was sitting outside at the bar, right next to the complex, still in her wedding dress, with makeup smeared everywhere and drinking beers with her friends. The groom phoned her father, who then promptly came to pick her up and take her home. And that's the last I ever saw of bridezilla. They tried to make it work by going to counseling, and things just kind of fizzled out. Mainly because she was always drunk. They'd lived together for 2 years or so prior to the wedding, and while she did drink a lot, I never noticed it was that bad. Meanwhile, my friend informed me it had actually been a bit of a problem, but he didn't think it would get that bad. Well, it did. The wedding photographer and videographer was a friend of ours and was recording pretty much everything, so there's still a copy of this out somewhere. It reminds me I should probably email him and request a copy. In short, bride was absolutely crap-faced, fell at the church, fought with the groom at the altar, and then stormed off crying and screaming, and then continued drinking. What's it like being friends with an influencer in real life? Awful. One of my best friends fell real hard into Instagram. And for a few years it was tolerable and understandable, albeit strange and annoying. Everything needed to be documented in specific ways, so lots and lots of photos, even if it took away from the moment. But the strange part was how, when it happened, she'd share things, and the captions always told a slightly different story than what actually happened. Like, just off enough for me and my other friends to say, that has a weird quality to it. Fast forward a couple of years, and she gets engaged. Boom! This was the catalyst for the worst of the influencer mentality to come out. I was in the bridal party, and it was a nightmare. No gratitude, just demands. Demands for expensive trips and expensive parties, and all kinds of things that were above and beyond the means of her closest friends. And all the demands were because she had a following and had certain expectations to meet. It was really heart-wrenching to witness someone belittle their best friend and maid of honor for trying to plan a sweet bridal shower because it wasn't going to be at an expensive restaurant or art gallery. It reached its peak for me when, after the in-state wedding became an expensive destination wedding, there was the demand for an out-of-town bachelorette party a few weeks before. I was honest and said I couldn't afford the bachelorette. Mind you, I made about 1,000 sacrifices over these months to afford what I could, and I was promptly bridezillaed and told I ruined the whole experience and that I was an awful, fake, inauthentic person. It got so bad that the bridal party fractured and disintegrated. She lost 2 of her best friends. Myself and the maid of honor didn't even attend the wedding after all her behavior and blow-ups, and we've barely spoken since. All so she could have an Instagrammable wedding that would look good for the few photos she ended up sharing of it. And true to the weird, strange, rewritten reality ways she had, she published a public apology on her blog for her followers and family that completely distorted and rewrote what happened, painted herself as the victim, and got her the sympathy points she was looking for. People really lose themselves when they create an artifice for social media. I learned a lot from her. I dated one. Not super popular, but followers in the 100k range last time we spoke. I remember a lot of getting ignored and only receiving nice gifts or acts of kindness when they could post about it. Asking me to go nice places, they didn't drive, only to leave me on the beach somewhere while they took pictures. Huge strain on the relationship, especially when they started to get bigger and there was more demand for content. Maybe I'm too cynical, but I could see myself dating an awful, vapid, but attractive person over a summer to bum off the expensive trips and gifts for a few months before leaving. Am I a crap person for that? Actually, don't answer. I'll be happier that way. She hasn't come to anything I've invited her to in 5 years because she only goes to events that further her business. Regularly says things like, "We're all using each other for something." Sometimes she texts me the exact same thing, word for word, over a couple of days, and it's obvious she just copy-pastes the same thing and sends it to all of us and then forgets who she sent it to. She still reaches out to me multiple times a year and claims I'm one of her best friends, but it sure doesn't feel like it. I've told her as much, but she just says, "This is my life now, my business comes first, and if you can't accept that, then I guess you're not a real friend." I worked with YouTube influencers in my last job with an agency that paired sponsors with these celebrities. I basically did the grunt work like insuring hotels, plane tickets, getting coffee, running errands, and meeting with the talent to ensure they were where they needed to be, like events, conferences, trade shows, parties, or whatever. Over time, you make friends with others who are in those positions, especially when you're running errands for some entitled pseudo-celebrity. The nicest YouTubers were the animators, always calm and understanding. The worst were the family vloggers. I've met all the big ones and I never met one that wasn't a completely different person off camera. The kids are always spoiled and no one disciplines them, so they're running around breaking things or acting like idiots. And no one can yell at them lest their influencer parents find out. A close second is makeup YouTubers. Pretty mundane, honestly. My friend is conventionally attractive, and if you look at her social media, you'd think she were a supermodel millionaire who goes on tons of trips. She's actually chronically unemployed and has an income of less than 10k a year. Her boyfriend makes about 60k, which is enough to afford them a very nice 3.5-bedroom apartment, and she has tons of props she uses to make each room look different from day to day, so it seems like she's always in a new, exotic place. They take 2 trips a year to fun, tropical places in which she takes many photos and posts them as different places throughout the year. She's very kind, considerate, and a sparkling personality, but whenever we hang out, I tend to be a shoulder to cry on as she laments about her lack of success in life. It's quite sad, honestly, but with her creativity and personality, I think she'll achieve her dreams eventually. This is the most wholesome response I've seen in this post so far, yet it still manages to be sad. If anything, because she's actually a nice person, like you say, that actually makes it sadder than other responses I've read. It's annoying as frick. One of my buddies is constantly filming everything we do and posting it. It's to the point where people walk up to me on the street and ask me about him because they've seen me in his posts. I have no idea who they are. It dominates everything he does and has severely impacted his personal relationships. He can't keep a girlfriend, and it's clearly related to this obsession of his. He does occasionally get some cool stuff out of it, though. After pretty much kicking him out of my life because I don't want to be continually posted online, we come to an understanding that when he's about to take a pic or video, he hands me the phone so I'm not in the shot. That works okay for me. Friends with a high-profile athlete who's pretty popular on Insta. He's always on the phone and never lives in the moment. If we're doing anything fun, well, it basically didn't happen unless the world knows about it. It's just annoying. I can't imagine living for the approval or satisfaction of others. This was my ex-girlfriend. I couldn't eat before she took a dozen pictures. We went hiking and had to turn around less than a mile in, since she spent an hour taking photos and posting videos. Service connection wasn't good enough, so we went to the trail ahead. She had to post, or else people are gonna think I'm broke or depressed and they need to know I'm traveling. She lived her life through her phone. I post travel photos and have about 200 followers, 200, not 2,000 or higher. My friend somehow thought that was influencer status and decided to copy me, except she quit her job so she could travel more and grow her brand. In 2020, she lost her apartment, her car, and still hasn't found a job, but calls herself a professional influencer all the same. Professional influencer? Jesus fricking Christ. I know a wannabe influencer. She'll reply to her own posts from her husband's account praising herself. Then she'll reply to those posts as herself thanking him. It's hilarious, like Inception for Facebook. Apparently, this is not uncommon. I frequent a gossip blog that has a handful of crackpot commenters who, savvier members claim, have created multiple accounts to start drama and argue with themselves and others. The same individual has been accused of this multiple times, and the accusers seem pretty positive about it. It's a major disruption and a pain in the butt for those of us who just go there to read the blind items and guess the celebrity talk or some standard trash. At one point, the site master had to rejigger the whole site to implement a new commenting platform so we could self-regulate. It's a shame we lost almost 10 years of historical comments with accurate, juicy details as a result. Hey, don't judge me, we all have our weird little communities, right? Ugh, fabricating workplace drama with yourself? That's enough internet for the human race, I think. Let's burn it all down. Oh wait, I need it for my job. Damn it! Anyone want to buy cassette tapes of these videos from me via snail mail instead? To be honest, it's really crap to be friends with one. I feel like I've been completely forgotten about and like I don't matter anymore. I think that's just some weird misguided jealousy, but it still hurts because I miss talking to my friend. Depending on how far down the narcissism hole you think your friend has gone versus how normal they still are, it could be worthwhile having a chat about it or sending a brief text like, "Hey, hope you're rocking your online life. I miss chilling like we used to, and I'd love to hang out off the grid sometime. Let me know if you're down." But I don't know, that could be too cringe. I mean, I threw up a little at the rocking your online life part, but it is great advice, for most of these posts actually. Sad. In the beginning, they started because they got offers from brands because they were so popular on Instagram, and it was a lot of fun for them. Now they don't ever post pictures or videos without a filter. Rarely ever like a picture on the first try, and don't you dare post any pictures of them without getting their approval for it. Imagine trying to get a group picture with all of your friends for your birthday, but having to take almost 100 shots to get that one of your influencer friend that they're happy with. Also, in the beginning, I would like and comment on all of their posts, but now that's not enough. They expect me to message it to others, share it on my stories and my page, something about the new algorithms and likes not being important anymore. I hate posting stuff to my page, but I do it anyway to be supportive. It's so tiring. They do get free things sometimes though, that they sometimes share with me. Not worth it in my opinion. My cousin is a wannabe influencer. She kept denying family photos at a birthday party, so her mum told her just not to be in pictures anymore. Haha, idiot got a reality check. So incredibly annoying. I actually ended up cutting her off because everything had to be a photo opportunity. We could never just go out to lunch or see a movie without it turning into a photo shoot. She never did anything with our friend group unless it was aesthetic. And even then, she was so focused on getting us to take photos that A, she didn't get to enjoy the activity, and B, it started bringing everyone else down because they couldn't participate either. And this sounds so petty, but she could never just show up in a t-shirt and leggings. Because photos, obviously. Like even sleepovers and movie nights had to be a big production, and sometimes you just need to stuff your face with popcorn and look like a slob. It's good for the soul. She'd also complain a lot about how hard her job was. Our friendship group at the time consisted of an EMT, 2 nurses, a teacher, and me who was juggling university, tutoring, and working retail. Like, I'm sure she had challenges and all jobs are hard sometimes, but girl, you get paid to take selfies with free stuff and show up at events looking pretty. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mine became a horrible, self-centered bully. Exactly as fake and staged as you imagine it to be, the on-camera moments are completely non-genuine. It is, in the end, just an acting or modeling job and not their real personality. The fake laughing in photos is always so cringe-inducing for me to watch. Then the photo is taken and the smile is instantly replaced with a furrowed brow as they decide whether the pictures are acceptable. No, they're not. They hand the camera back to whoever and restart the candid laughing all over again. I sold my place to one a while ago, one of those newly green, sustainable body positivity types. Pretty much everything about what this person projects as a social media image is as fake as it turned out. It was quite a sobering experience. She is annoying. There's no other word to describe her. I feel sorry for her because she's a person that needs attention all the time. We're not friends, but we live in the same house. Everything is fake. The attitude, the mannerisms, everything. It sounds stupid until you realize they clear close to 7 figures a year. One time we vacationed with them, and when we were out to dinner, they said to us, "1 second, we need to go and film a bit." And they went from our friends, who are calm and nice, to their, "Hey guys, we're in the beautiful south of France." Annoying people everyone loves to hate. I've got a friend with 75k subscribers on YouTube in a language other than English. It used to be about their weekend getaways with nice drone shots. It was interesting. Then gradually became about their lives. She gets her phone or camera out at sometimes random moments, which could get annoying. She got pregnant, and now everything is about the baby. Oh, that poor child. I'd hope that she's at least one of the ones that doesn't show the baby's face, but that seems like I'm asking too much for some of these people. Honestly, she's really nice. She hosted a book club in a bar I worked at and would always order wine or pretty cocktails for photos. But once everyone left, she'd sit at the bar and shoot the crap with me while drinking yard beers. My sister has tens of thousands of followers. We used to be best friends in high school, and she was my favorite sibling. I'm number 7 out of 8 kids in my family. I know my parents are crazy. Now I feel like I barely know her. It's like she's this shell of a person that she used to be. Seriously, I've never met anyone who could make me laugh as hard as she used to make me laugh. Now I just sort of want to blow my brains out when I'm around her. She's just so obsessed and fake now. It actually makes me really sad. My wife has a friend that thinks she's a Kardashian with her 80k followers and does everything for the gram. Her ex-boyfriend bought most of them, and she only gets around 50 likes per post. Not a friend per se, but my ex's sister is an influencer for beauty and makeup, with over 1 million followers on YouTube. She was so anxious and stressed all the time, horribly insecure. If she got some backlash or bad comments, she'd be so upset, was on a lot of anti-anxiety medication. And meanwhile, all of her posts are just her looking beautiful and traveling. She didn't have many friends either. That I saw anyway, just lots of fans. It looked like a terrible life. It ruined the illusion for me that their lifestyles are happy and perfect, that is, and I'm thankful for being able to see behind the curtain. One of my friends dated someone that was really Instagram famous. He invited us to his house for a Christmas party, and this was when I realized how fake social media really is. The guy didn't have the car he paraded on social media. He had leased it, taken several photo shoots with it, and then given it back. His house was in a different city than he claimed. I don't think it was for security reasons, though. He said he lived in a very rich city, but his house was in a more modest place. He asked me to send him the videos I took at the party and posted them and didn't even tag me because I didn't have enough followers. The worst part was that all the social media people at the party just kept yelling over each other trying to make the next big joke, but none of them were funny. Dude has millions of people fooled. The part about always trying to make the next big joke but not being funny is incredibly relatable. I ran with a popular crowd in high school. I was a major D-bag too, and I regret it. And we all liked to pretend we were influencers. Always had our phones out, always recording things, and constantly trying to make videos like the Vines and the 30-minute Vine compilations we'd watch. At least we had the excuse of being dumb high schoolers, but man, was it cringy. I have a friend who's recently started trying to become one. It's so dumb. She posts half-undressed photos of herself with captions that have nothing to do with the picture. She spends hours getting ready for her iPhone photo shoots and has little time for anything besides content creation. Being an influencer is pretty much against everything I care about and stand for, so I envision us slowly drifting further apart. That crap is stupid. I'm not friends with any of my influencers anymore, but I used to work in San Diego nightlife, and I had to rub elbows with a lot of these types. I'm talking 1 to 6 million follower type girls who were brought into the club as promoters, back in 2016 when 1 million followers was a huge deal. The girls themselves aren't actually that bad. Some are crazy entitled, but for the most part they're there for business, and San Diego is a small enough town that reputation matters. The worst were the sub-suckers. Other girls who had fewer than 1 million followers who hung around to try and soak up subscribers and make contacts in the industry. Think of them like small-time actors who think they're a big deal because they've got a few pilots in production. I'm not big now, but you should kiss my butt because I'm the next big thing types. These girls would literally do nothing but take pictures all night or all day depending on the club and demand free bottles, extra service, and other garbage without ever tipping. F influencers. I went on a date with one and it was just frustrating. Pleasant enough girl, but she was on her phone a lot. I had sympathy since it's her job, but I felt ignored a lot of the time we were together. It's sad. You always watch them slowly mentally degrade. Always ends in full-blown NPD or them having literally zero self-confidence. Their goal is to meet artificial metrics in terms of likes or views or follows. For a lot of them, that's their definition of success or their goal in life, and if they're not hitting it, they've failed as people in their minds. So they go one of two routes. One is thinking that they're really not good enough and don't deserve to be liked, which leads to a lack of confidence and then becoming a shell of the person they used to be. 2 is narcissism, where they come to the conclusion that they're the best person ever and no one else knows what they're talking about, and every single flaw, fault, or mistake they've ever made is someone else's fault. That sounds like a rough life to live, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone, to be honest. Not an influencer as such, but I worked as an animator for an educational kids YouTube channel for a number of years. My boss was obsessed with views and subscriber count. A big part of one of my colleagues' jobs was spending hours trawling through all of our competitors' videos and channels, putting all of their views and subscriber counts into a massive spreadsheet. He also couldn't work out why none of his employees were as invested in the channel as he was, and why we weren't all clamoring to do huge amounts of unpaid overtime in the name of furthering the channel's growth. When I got hired, the channel had just passed 1 million subs and 1 billion views, and both those numbers doubled by the time I left. This was a few years ago, before YouTube Kids was even a thing, but kids' videos always get a huge amount of views anyway. Last I heard, he had fired all of his remaining employees and was making unboxing videos alone in his house that got hardly any views. My sister was an influencer of sorts. She was on Instagram doing bodybuilding and was sponsored by a few protein shake companies. She didn't have mega fame or anything, but did have friends in high places. She was one of those B-word popular girls in high school, and that persona carried on into her influencer career. She was very distant from her family and cut off most of her old friends. The few times she did visit, she was very selective about who could be seen with her. She moved to another city to be closer to the bodybuilding scene, building followers up as she went. She dated some guy who gave her a lavish lifestyle for a bit, then cheated on her after a few years. Probably the entire time, actually. So she moved to the other side of the country, continued her bodybuilding, but then decided she wanted to be a cop. They told her she'd never be a cop with a social media presence like that, because too easy for the media to use it against her, so she went home, deleted every account that day, and then went back. Now, she's a cop, and doing so much better in life than she ever did before. All of her old personality is gone, and I've never been prouder of her in my life. She's really nice now, and spends her days being a small-town cop in the middle of nowhere. I've driven 3 hours, hiked 1 hour, so they could take a couple of photos over about 5 minutes and then whined that they were ready to go home. Sometimes they'll buy unhealthy but grammable food, take photos of them licking it, and then throw it out. I also have a friend who, when overseas, will set alarms for like 3 a.m. to wake up and post their photos from the day at the peak time back home. I haven't seen them for a while. My cousin is a moderately successful Instagram model and she absolutely hates it. She hates her fans, finds them all cringy and pathetic, hates the drama, and how PC it all is. In real life, she's very conservative and traditional. Only does it because it's the only way she can make money. She dropped out of school and endorsing products and taking pictures of herself is the only way she knows how to pay rent. In real life, she's basically the complete opposite of the happy, bubbly, ditzy girl she plays online. And we often laugh over some of the messages she receives, including proposals and women angry that their sons or husbands are following her. How do people not realize it's all an act? I mean, damn, it took all of 15 picoseconds of my girlfriend showing me people she follows on Instagram to realize these aren't authentic people living realistic lives. And I'm a frickin' moron. He was cool, but at the same time, difficult. Get him alone and he was okay, but go out places with him and he started unnecessary drama and was super emotional. I ended up not being friends with him after a convention we went to because he caused a lot of trouble for me and my friends. It sucked because I was the one who intervened and allowed him to stay, and all of my friends were super upset with him, so I felt like I allowed a lot of the issues. I hope he's doing okay though. What is the worst advice you've ever received in your life?
Don't quit your job at Walmart. You've been here for 3 years. Just 7 more and you'll be fully vested in the company.
Ugh, one thing I just remembered about that job. We had a manager who, since the time I started working there, couldn't speak above a whisper no matter how hard she tried. It had been like this for years. 2 years after I was hired, she finally found a doctor who figured out the problem. Apparently, if you're stressed out every single day for years on end, it can cause a psychogenic voice disorder. He ordered her to take 3 months off work. When she came back, she could speak normally. When I was in high school, I had a friend who was not the smartest. I remember him telling me if I didn't want to get a woman pregnant, then she should be on top so the semen can't flow up. He became a father his sophomore year.
You know, son, there's really no such thing as cheating if you aren't married. The Bible doesn't recognize any relationship that isn't bound in the covenant of the Lord. So until you're married, relationships don't really exist.
Thanks, Dad. You just indirectly explained why you're on your 3rd marriage. Had an uncle tell me that men could be allowed to fool around in relationships as it was their impulse to have as many children as possible. And women, well, look at a man other than your husband and you're a prostitute. I have some questionable family members. I called Kids Help Phone when I was a teen to ask for advice on how to help my depressed friend. They advised I find new friends. I wish I was making this up. To clarify, the conversation was very short. I explained my friend had been struggling, depressed, and with no motivation and isolating herself from others. Along those lines, it was a while back, and I asked what I could do. The only piece of advice they gave me was, let her sort it out on her own, and find new friends. That's it. Nothing to interpret or misinterpret, I don't think. We remained friends though, and she's alright now. Get used to it, my old boss told me when my 8-hour day shift job changed to a variable 8 to 10-hour night shift. This would effectively remove me from spending time with my wife and young children. I took his advice as a catalyst to engineer the greatest adventure of my life. Transferred to a job across country, hugely upgraded my living conditions for my family. New boss completely understood the demands of a parent and adjusted my work schedule accordingly. I'm so thankful for my new boss, but I'm even more thankful for the old one, for giving me the worst advice I've ever received in my life. There you go. Kinda seemed like the first boss might have been burnt out on their own life to be that callous about yours. You deserve your best life, folks. When my marriage was on the rocks, my dad said, "Son, go out and find yourself an older woman that just wants to frick and keep your marriage. She, my wife, doesn't have to know and you'll be getting laid, and the older woman will just be happy without a commitment." Thankfully, I didn't go that route, and my marriage is repaired and stronger than ever today.
Oh, but the old lady who just wants to F is still lonely. Stop being so selfish.
It looks like you're using an ad blocker. Please turn it off to continue viewing this page. I mentioned in passing that my boyfriend suffered from a terrible Charlie horse in the middle of the night. My bizarre space cadet of a coworker heard this and immediately interjected, frantically explaining that I needed to get him to a hospital because this was a surefire symptom of pregnancy. She also recommended that I call the news because my boyfriend is, well, a man. I guess she thought history was about to go down. Spoiler alert, he wasn't pregnant. She also believed that cheese made outside the US wasn't really cheese. Her mindset on most issues was difficult to explain. Just have kids. You'll figure out how to afford them later. When my daughter was an infant, my wife couldn't breastfeed, and my daughter couldn't digest formula very well, so I had to buy a special pre-digested formula for like $25 a can. I was at the cashier paying for the formula, and the guy in front of me was gathering his things. He said to me, "When my kids were babies, I wish I knew what I know now." And I said, "What's that? What do you know?" He said, "Babies don't need formula. All they need is sugar water. All the rest is a scam." And I was like, I'm so glad you didn't know that back then.
Yeah, my brother had someone tell him that babies can start eating solids 2 to 3 weeks after their birth.
The coworker who told him this has 2 children. A guy at my work told me once that as long as you don't physically block the exit, it wasn't considered the unspeakable act. I had just asked how to deal with my girlfriend who wasn't upfront about her interests. Yeah, I made a note to warn all of my female friends about him. My high school guidance counselor said that I wasn't college material, and I took her advice and started the process of joining the Marines with my friends, who were also told this. My chemistry teacher at the time scheduled a substitute, personally drove me to a nearby college, and sat there with me while I spoke with admissions. Fast forward a few years, and after receiving a chemistry and chemical engineering dual degree and then going on to get a PhD in chemical engineering, I'd say that guidance counselor knew crap all.
Just listen to your academic advisor, they know what they're doing.
Thousands of dollars added to cost of education, an extra senior year, and a withdrawal on record. Seriously, don't be afraid to push back on your advisors if you're concerned about what they say or do.
Just don't fight back. Men act like that because they want to assert dominance. As soon as he realizes you've accepted his behavior, he'll leave you alone.
The hard and fast rule for any human relationship is that any bullcrap you accept early on in that relationship sets you up to get even more bullcrap in the future. Guaranteed.
I have an open door policy, so don't hesitate to see me if you have any issues at all.
I learned the hard way never to trust any boss or HR rep that says that crap. Utilizing open door policies is a damn good way to get fired for being a troublemaker. I'm having an issue at work. My boss is a major creep to every woman. Doesn't matter how old or young. My coworker and I were talking about reporting him to HR because they have an anonymous line you can call. However, HR says nothing will ever come of an anonymous tip because they need to be able to have your name and interview you. Otherwise, people would just be calling in fake information about anyone they don't like. Nobody wants to be the first one that steps up and has their name out there and get in trouble. I just got promoted to my dream position by him, so I definitely don't want to risk it. Yep, sadly enough, I've heard that in most American companies, the last thing you want to do is complain about a higher-up to HR. I hope that's flawed advice and that most of you find otherwise, but it's what I've heard. They exist to protect the company they work for.
When I was little, I told my mom that I was sad because some kids were bullying me. She said I should tell them that when they bullied me, it hurt me inside and that they'd stop. I did what she said.
This was bad advice. They did not stop. I know someone who taught her 5-year-old to tell people, "You're making me very angry." Yeah, that worked out really well. "Don't go through chemotherapy, eat this nut and berry mix instead," said my younger sister when she visited me in hospital when I went for febrile neutropenia, which means no white blood cells and I had a fever. She also showed up claiming to have bronchitis and didn't wear a mask and full-on hugged me. Yeah, she's a piece of work. Even knowing what I do now about what it would do to my reproductive health, in short, permanent menopause at 26, I'd still go with chemotherapy 1,100%. I was going to die without it, with a 100% guarantee. I'd be dead by the time I turned 27. My life is more important than my ability to have children the old-fashioned way. I should clarify I was diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, co-classified with bulky disease, and was receiving chemo for it. The febrile neutropenia was a side effect of the treatment. Holistic people are the most fun, aren't they? This leaf from Tanzania will cure you of your life-threatening disease, and it's all natural. My psychiatrist told me I could stop taking the SNRI antidepressants I was on more or less cold turkey. It was technically safe, but holy crap, it was a tough couple of weeks. Partly because of unpleasant physical sensations and partly because it was the closest to actual crazy I'd ever felt. Buy a house in 2006. It'll be the best decision you ever make. It was the worst decision they ever made. When I found out I was pregnant with my youngest son, my mum and her boyfriend told me to abort. Not because I couldn't afford the baby or that there was something wrong with him, but because my mum was going through menopause and didn't want to be reminded that she couldn't have any more kids. Just open another credit card, it's free money, coming from my friend who is in thousands of dollars worth of debt and has no idea she will eventually have to pay that off. Also, another gem, this same girl thought she would get a marketing job right out of college that would pay her $70K a year, and she wouldn't take anything less because she'd be selling myself short. Don't be afraid to seek help at mental health. It won't adversely affect your Air Force career. I've been turned down for 2 amazing job opportunities because of my visits to mental health. To clarify, I'm already in the Air Force. I saw mental health for depression and anxiety-related issues, and was later rejected for new jobs with the Air Force because of those visits, despite assurances to and endorsements by several providers stating that my issues had been resolved. The last couple of years of my life and career have been immensely frustrating, and it's put me in a dark place that I haven't really been able to escape since. I'm not planning to do anything stupid, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to see the proverbial light lately. I'm not giving up. I think I'm too stubborn to do that. But I've come to realize that I'm probably going to be here for a while, so I might as well make myself comfortable. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In my final semester of college, my insanely jealous, distraught mother called me to make one last plea to get me to drop out. She went on to say, "What would you do if you had to watch helplessly as your own daughter threw her life away and became a nurse?" By the way, she married an elementary school dropout and was a bitter retail worker. She couldn't handle watching me be the first in my family to graduate from college and make something of myself, and she dealt with it by constantly shaming me. If I scored 99% on something, she complained about the last 1%. If I got 100%, she said I was stupid because I didn't earn bonus marks. We don't talk anymore, and I'm a successful nurse. As is tradition, I received the typical, "Well, I hope you still love her and talk to her. Be the better person," response that survivors of this kind of behavior often receive. If your narcissistic parents won't stop, there's nothing wrong with leaving and never looking back. Yes, even if it's your own mother. This is me being the better person and respecting myself and my children enough to not subject us to her behavior. Sounds familiar? My dad was a bricklayer and his dad was a fabric cutter. I got constant complaining every day about wasting time at school like a posh C-word ever since I was 16 and decided to do A-levels. When I left for university, he told me I wouldn't last a month. I started practicing medicine as a doctor next summer, and he still calls me to tell me all the lads I knew on the council estate have married and had kids and have their own cars. Yeah, Dad, I know I'd have my own van by now if I was a plumber. No, Dad, I know there's nothing wrong with being in the trades or the forces. It's just not for me. Nothing like holding your children back into the exact same path as you despite their dreams lying elsewhere. Keep it up, crappy parents. A friend of mine would always get me to talk about my relationships and would somehow twist the smallest things into seeming like they were really bad, and then suggest that I should break up with them, and I'd be like, "You're right, why am I putting up with this crap?" when it could have been something completely normal. Happened with 3 girls in a row, and it was always the same stuff he said, and I just snapped out of it one day and realized that I'd been the crappy boyfriend, and the reason it didn't work was because of how I was acting after hearing all of these things put into my head. I think he was just jealous because he could never get any girls, but what a weird thing to look back on. Engineer, salaried, married with kid. Also have a master's degree and several years of experience. Vice president of the company advised me to work at McDonald's after work if I wanted to make more money. He even took out his calculator and told me how many hours I should work. That guy was fired about a year after that for bullying employees. I tried to leave but ended up staying and turned down other jobs. Not a bad place to be for now. I spoke about it to a couple of senior executives I trusted at the time. The second worst advice I ever received from the same guy, he tells me, "You have to reward people for putting in extra hours at their work. Do you know how to do that?" Me? Bonuses? He proceeded with opening a Costco-sized bag of Fig Newtons, handed me a bag, got out of his office and started distributing Fig Newtons on the manufacturing floor. This wasn't me personally, but my mum told me that we had a neighbor that used to constantly tell my dad that life insurance was a waste of money and tried to convince him to stop paying for it. Fortunately, my dad was intelligent because he died 5 years later and my family would have been completely destroyed without it. My careers advisor in high school, when I said, "I think I want to do something with computers," she said, "Have you heard of Microsoft?" Then she wrote the word Microsoft on a piece of paper and slid it across the table, and that was my careers interview over. Out of everything, this has to be the funniest one here, especially if you apply it to weirdly specific stuff. "I think I want to do something with cars." "Have you heard of Toyota?" Then she wrote Toyota on a piece of paper and slid it across the table, and that was my career interview over. Someone told me I should have kids in my early 20s so I can just get it out of the way. Your family is the only thing that will ever be there for you, not your friends, your family. And I just got excommunicated from my narcissistic, abusive family 2 days before Thanksgiving. Anything in any romantic comedy ever. Harass the woman you want with unwanted, over-the-top romantic gestures until she falls in love with you. The part that bugs me the most is how they always make the current boyfriend or girlfriend horrible. Most of the time they don't even do anything wrong. They just aren't making their significant other the center of their universe.
Stop reading. You read too much. You're going to hurt your eyes. Go watch TV for a while.
My grandma, every time she visited, while grabbing the books from my hands, it was like something off The Simpsons. She really said that? My elders had to force me to read. The advice to have children as soon as possible. 8th grade geography exam was coming up and we'd been studying the Middle East. My father had recently returned from Africa, where someone had incorrectly informed him that Israel is technically a part of Africa. He was extremely convincing. My teacher literally said, "Jesus, we've been studying this for weeks, kid."
So, take a piece of sandpaper and rough your nips up before the baby comes.
A coworker to pregnant me about how to feed my kid. I don't have to deal with that eventuality of parenthood, and I'm doubled over in front of my screen in pain after reading that. "Oh, go and see Jack and Jill with Adam Sandler. It's funny," said Todd from accounting. Dear God, there are no words. Did you see it? I assume Todd is dead from having tragically swallowed his own tongue during breakfast. Stop thinking about depression. There are more people who have greater problems than yours. Non-verbatim. It's like saying don't eat food when you're hungry because someone somewhere else is starving. When people told me to ignore the bullies, you don't need to fight them, but standing up for yourself is far better than taking it, internalizing it, and letting it hold you back. My college roommate, drink beer and nothing hard when you party. It fills you up so you'll throw it up before you get alcohol poisoning, and then you can drink more right away. Don't make any friends. Friends will ruin your life.
I haven't made any friends, and I've ruined my own life just fine, thank you very much.
When I was a teenager and had acne, none of the over-the-counter acne medicine was working. My mum brought me to a dermatologist and the medicine they prescribed me was very expensive, so before buying it, my mum searched for any home remedies online. The home remedy she found was to use urine. The way to apply it was worse. My mum went to the store to buy supplies, and for over a month, I would pee into a diaper and place it on my face for 15 minutes as part of my morning routine. Worst advice I've ever taken. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I was given a Superman cape for my birthday. I was told that it could make me fly. After a few days of not being able to fly, I began to ask people how to make it work. They advised that I needed to find somewhere high up to jump off of. So I started jumping off fences, trees, and then I was told I needed to jump off something taller. I was miserable with the school I was in and wanted to study my dream career. A friend told me that no one does what they like and I should deal with it. I didn't. I did leave, and now I'm about to get a degree on the career I love. I know things will be tough, but I don't regret it. In my country, most of us are out of a job, so I figured if I'm going to be unemployed, better be at something I like. Somebody told me that girls like to be smacked around a little. Pro tip, always ask first. Schedule all of your college courses at 8 a.m., then you've got the rest of the day to relax. This works if you're a morning person. Afternoon classes were hell for me, but I loved having 8s. When you're undecided about what to do with your life and people say, do what you're passionate about or love, well, fricking thank you. Like, I'm obviously not that passionate about anything if I've got to ask this question, right? I was advised to go to Bible college and to find myself a godly husband. I didn't take that advice and instead hung out at the engineering college and married an engineer. I had a friend do this. She found a godly husband, all right. 3 rehab stints later, years of physical, emotional, and verbal battering, and numerous threats, and she's just now finding the strength to divorce him. When I was fresh out of the Navy and going to college on the GI Bill, my dad tried repeatedly to get me to drop out of college. He honestly thought that pursuing a biology degree at no cost to myself was a waste of my time. It wasn't until I started my master's degree that he was finally supportive of my educational goals. He tells me he's proud of me, and when I remind him that he tried to get me to drop out, he denies it. It's funny how selective parents' memories get when you get older. They never seem to remember anything they did wrong. Just get over it, my mum, anytime I had any sort of emotional, mental, or bullying issue. Your mother was likely told this growing up, and it's the only thing she knows to say in this situation. She probably doesn't even realize it either. My high school guidance counselor told me, "You'll never make a living drawing monsters." I became one of the original artists of Magic the Gathering, created the Prototype franchise, ran various video game franchises for Warner Brothers like Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, created the Delta Green series of books which topped $440K on Kickstarter and BackerKit. These things are filled with monsters, so suck it, Miss Ehrlich. Not me, but I was there when my husband's aunts told him that he needed to be more like his cousin. Everyone knew the cousin was worthless, so it was shocking. At the time, my husband was in college and working full-time in IT, actually doing pretty well for himself, while his cousin had a job at some stadium making $12, which they all thought was great. After their little pep talk, they convinced his mum to agree. That's when I told him I believed in him and they were crazy. 20 years later, my husband is very successful, while the cousin is in prison for inappropriate conduct with minors. Seriously, his aunts were stupid C-words. When did an improvement ruin a product? Algorithm-based timelines instead of chronological ones. Cough, Facebook, Instagram. I love seeing posts from 5 days ago at the top of my feed. Facebook mid-video ads. Screw that, personalized ads. It just makes me scroll down my feed. There hasn't been a single video that I hadn't skipped every time an ad comes up. Literally, the second I see that little countdown to an ad pop up, I lose all interest in the video and close it. I hate the new plastic Snapple bottles. Weather.com. It used to provide me with accurate weather forecasts. It is now one giant cesspool of clickbait articles with questionable weather numbers mixed in sporadically. Literally everything about iTunes. Someone once called it a software update utility that also plays music. Someone here has already said Facebook, but I need to make a special mention for Messenger. F you, Messenger. Yes, I know I added a friend because I fricking added them. When a story gets traction, the author generally says, "Oh gosh, this isn't what I want to be remembered for on the internet." For me, this is exactly what I want to be remembered for. F you, Messenger, you piece of crap. Messenger treats us like we're people from commercials. Hey John, just wanted to let you know I've connected with you on Facebook. Wow, that's great to hear, Simon. Digital cable. Cable used to flip channels instantly. All you had to do was remember a 2-digit number for each channel. Now it takes 30 seconds to load up every channel. That stupid live camera option on Facebook when you swipe left. As someone with mild motor tics, especially with my hands, I'm constantly opening the fricking camera by accident. If I see that dancing guy one more time, I'm going to do nothing and probably still accidentally open that camera 1,000 more times. This comment is from 6 years ago, and the narrator has just tried swiping left a few times to see whether he can make some kind of camera appear, and at the very least it doesn't seem to be a thing on my Facebook app anymore. So maybe they did realize how terrible it was. Now we just have to deal with all the many other things terrible about Facebook. Whatever Yahoo did to Flickr. Yahoo tends to do that. I'm really curious on how Yahoo is turning a profit, or at least had enough presence to make Verizon want them. Yahoo is like that one kid who was super cool freshman year, but by senior year he became the creep selling substances and hitting on middle schoolers. For a search engine, they really don't do their job well. So many ads on their page. F me sideways, the company that got majorly hacked was actually doing pretty well for itself. Who knew? My mouse has pop-ups in the system tray. My mouse has pop-ups in my system tray. ES File Explorer for Android. It used to be a nifty little program. Now it's laden with ads, irritating notifications, etc. A textbook example of bloatware. Skype, the mobile version. It was very practical, simple to use before. Since June or so, it became meh. Copying Instagram and Messenger's trends with these moment things, a terrible UI and even a lack of functionalities from the previous versions. Oh, this applies to the PC version too. Skype sucks and Discord's got video chat now and does everything Skype did better. Honestly, the only thing I want is screen share with sound. Then I can say Skype is 100% dead. When Hulu announced they'd be updating their interface, I was excited because they have a great content library, but the interface wasn't super good. It feels like they made it worse on purpose. Its dumpster fire of an interface on Android makes me question every person who worked on it. That's how I feel about Amazon Prime on anything but a PC. I know there's good stuff in there, but it's a pain in the butt looking for it. And it's pretty awful on the PC as well. I really haven't looked over there in a while, but the last time I did, they had seasons of shows as the main content for the show instead of the show name. For example, if they had Supernatural over there, instead of searching for Supernatural and finding that show and clicking in to look at seasons, you'd find like 11 separate entries of the show listed Supernatural, season, number, all in alphabetical order. So it looked like this. Supernatural Season 8, Supernatural Season 11, 5, 4, 9, 1, 7, 6. Next page of results, Supernatural Season 10, Season 3, Supernatural Season 2, really fricking helpful all round. Subscriptions for literally everything. You can't even buy software anymore, only rent. I'm looking at you, Adobe. Torrenting Adobe products is great, no monthly fees and no updates. Pyrex glass kitchenware. They used to be the gold standard in high-quality tempered glass products. But in 1998 they changed from borosilicate glass to soda lime glass, which was supposed to be cheaper and lighter, but it's less heat-resistant and breaks more easily. Whenever a news site has a video clip embedded at the top of the article that autoplays, and then fricking follows me down the page in a little embedded window, in the corner while continuing to play Frick You Go Away. Ah! And then it autoplays another video that has nothing to do with the article you're trying to read. Oh, what's that? You're listening to a music or podcast while you're reading the article? Not anymore. I'm taking over the sound. Every iOS update never fails to remove a feature I like or make something worse. Star Wars Galaxies, a great MMO that was ruined by improving it with combat and class system overhaul in order to compete with WoW. This only drove away the players and completely killed the game. They did it twice.
A lot of people weren't happy with the original combat upgrade, but the new game experience really drove people away. I really liked the original tree progression system. It was a really good game before they messed it all up. Almost every news or sports website redesign that adds white space, reduces readability, and removes critical content and relevant links to provide more space for social media tie-ins, irrelevant video clips, and invasive ad space. Content is being Twitterized. I keep wondering why all these news and article sites only had a strip of text in the center 25% of the screen. Everything else was just white space. Then I saw one on a friend's computer without ad block. Holy frick, how do people stand that? When I have to use a computer at school or when a site makes you whitelist it, it's such a horrible barrage on your senses. Feels like Fahrenheit 451. Can't think about the news because Buy Pepsi is dominating your attention. Hyundai now has an alarm on the dashboard that makes a piercing ding every time it detects the roadway is colder than 40 degrees. I live in North Idaho. I would do anything to disable that fricking alarm. Anything. Whatever the frick they did with mac and cheese, the Kraft brand. I saw a commercial semi-recently where they were all proud saying that they changed the recipe and nobody noticed. Bullcrap. I fricking noticed and I don't like it anymore. Didn't even notice, yeah. They didn't change it a little, it just doesn't even taste like it used to. You should check out the bulk mac and cheese powder at Bulk Barn. It's not exactly like old KD, but it's closer than the new garbage. Plus, now I can have radiatorian cheese instead of elbow noodles. The narrator did not understand any part of all this American product discussion, but figured he would enlighten any American viewers that are missing Kraft brand mac and cheese to the existence of this alternative from whatever or whoever Bulk Barn is. Is Bulk Barn a large gentleman called Barney? I'll never know. Heinz used to make hot ketchup that was insanely delicious. Then some buttwipe decided that it needed co-branding, so they put Tabasco in it, and now it's Heinz Hot and Spicy with Tabasco, and it tastes like butt. Almost all of YouTube's updates. First, the channel list update. Before you had your feed and you to your right, and all of your subscribed channels appeared on a black bar. Then they turned it into some stupid tabs thing. Probably the worst in my opinion is the comment section update. Now pressing view replies takes you to a different page with just that comment, instead of listing them right underneath the comment. Also, whenever I try to scroll through the comments, it always acts like I want to reply. Also, the trending tab and the share tab. The trending tab always has such stupid crap in it, and I don't think that anyone uses the shared tab at all. Most of these are on mobile, but if you're on your desktop, you probably won't notice them. Oh, this is easy. Angry Fricking Birds. Formerly one of the most fun apps, now ad-ridden garbage and a sign of the mobile industry. I don't even mind the ads that much if the game is free, but the energy system crap is insane. The guy who invented that and anyone who funds that behavior should be launched into the sun. Fricking garbage. Energy system? Oh god, is that as bad as it sounds? Yep. You only get so much energy per day, and when you run out, you can't play unless you pay with premium currency. So not only do you have to pay to play, you have to keep paying to keep playing. It literally boggles my mind that people actually fork over money just to play more. Yik Yak used to be a fantastic social media app catered towards college kids a few years ago. It was basically an anonymous Twitter specifically for your geographic location. It was fantastic for news and updates about campus events and seeking help or advice from fellow students. You could even view Yik Yaks at other colleges around the US. Then they decided to add optional usernames, and that started a downward descent into what was essentially a rip-off of Facebook. Users left in droves, and they shut down for good this past summer. It was a shame too, because at its peak it was a must-have for any college kid at a decent-sized school. This sucked for more than just students. I work for a university, and yes, faculty and staff downloaded the app, mostly just for a good laugh. Most of us didn't care what everyone was saying, but what it was fantastic about was an unfiltered forum for real legitimate complaints. I can think of 2 or 3 things that got addressed and resolved more or less as a direct result of the app. It always amazes me that these people are able to go from an app worth millions to killing it in a few short months. Or that whoever made the design choice for usernames wasn't promptly fired when they were overwhelmingly negatively received. Apparently, the best approach was to let them continue down that path instead.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm convinced hot Cheetos use less and less chili powder over time, and it makes them suck. I'm convinced the same thing happened to Sour Patch Kids. Either they wimped out on the sour, or I became immune to its effects. Imgur requiring you to log in to upload pictures from a phone. Instagram's non-chronological feeds, in my opinion. It annoyed me so much I barely use it anymore. I love checking Facebook and seeing a post from a good friend. I'm having a beer at X. Anyone keen to join me? Posted 2 days ago. Do I go? Will he still be there? Half of the practical uses of social media no longer work. This happens on an almost daily basis on Instagram. I'll see a comic post about a show happening tonight in 10 hours. Plenty of time to make plans and come out. Then I check and the post was from 22 hours ago. Unfortunately, this is the reality of practically every form of social media. It's very difficult to monetize a chronological feed purely with ads, so they change it to top liked or something else, which is very easy to monetize. Just give us some money and we'll make sure your post stays at the top of your followers' feed for 24 hours. Car alarms. Not once have I heard one and thought, my God, someone is breaking into that car. I hear it and go, who effed up now? My friend borrowed his wife's car and accidentally set the alarm off at a gas station. He couldn't figure out how to get it to turn off, and the manual for the car wasn't in the car for some reason. So he just drove it home with the alarm blaring the whole time. No one stopped him or did anything. They completely ignored it. LinkedIn after their design overhaul. You used to just be able to scroll down to browse through a person's projects, awards, and achievements. Now, entire sections are reduced to just one-sentence-long, vague descriptions. And the profiles just look fugly now. You have huge amounts of white space and teeny tiny little profile pictures, which are now circular too, to make it even more awkward. Not sure what I was supposed to improve, but I freaking hate how half the space on modern smartphones is eaten up by apps I don't use and can't uninstall. Yes. Frick that, man. It's basically a false advertisement. Yeah, here's our 16GB phone, but 11GB are all apps you never use and can't delete. Still 16GB though. Have fun with your 2 whole apps of your choice. Maybe the narrator is a freak, but he's never once in his life, from the first iPhone to his modern Samsung, used up all the storage on his device. Is that weird? Anything Facebook does. Remember when Facebook was chronological and genuinely about what you and your mates were up to? And now it's just glorified cloud storage for memes, financed by irrelevant ads. Don't get me wrong, man likes a meme. It's just not why I joined some 8 years ago. Do you want a rip-off of Snapchat story on your phone? Do you want every photo you take to give you a forced pop-up asking you to want to add this? Do you want listing yourself as going to an event to automatically create a dummy chat with everyone else listed as going? Do you want every friend request to create a dummy chat? Do you want swiping down on the app, the universal refresh motion, to instead open a camera? No? Well, tough crap, because you're getting it anyway. For real, I don't need my eggplant pics popping up on Facebook asking if I want to post them. No, I'm good, thanks. Microtransactions in console games. I get it in Facebook games and mobile games that are free, but in a game I've already paid $60 for, it's some BS. It puts people who don't want to pay more at a competitive disadvantage. They act like they're kindly offering us a shortcut, but microtransactions always make the game drag more, because they want to make you frustrated with a lack of progress, so you'll buy a booster pack or some crap. Same goes for pre-order bonuses and Day 1 DLC. They want to make you pay extra for that stuff that should already be in the game. Like, before I was fine paying like $5 for some good maps way after the game was released. Now though, they plan out selling you the game in pieces. It's ridiculous. Also, the games that make you grind so much, you're willing to buy whatever the frick it is. Frick the game industry, man. Microsoft buying out Skype. Skype has turned into a crappier version of the retired MSN. I exclusively use Discord now. There's actually a German word for this whole concept. Verschlimmbesserung, meaning an improvement that makes something worse. I'd say the iPhone, and now Pixel losing the headphone jack, is a great example of this. I think some video game patches are examples as well, when the balance or mechanical changes alter something you enjoyed about a game. Whatever the frick they did to honeycomb cereal. I bought one box and I'm never buying it again. New, bigger honey taste, my butt.
Yes. Why? Why would you do such a horrible thing to a delicious cereal?
Let me usher you into a paradise known as the Whole Foods Bar. This was a bar that was perfect in my opinion. It's a bar that is situated right in the middle of Whole Foods. They serve wine and beer, and all around the magnificent island of a bar is the wine and beer section full of anything you could possibly want. All you had to do was walk over and pick one of the hundreds of anything, and the bar will open it for you and serve it in a glass. Not only that, but you could grab any protein and almost anything else from the grocery store, with a beer or wine in hand, mind you, and bring it back and have the bar staff cook it for you for free. Crab? Done. Meatloaf? Cooked and ketchuped. Not only that, but they had amazing specials. A beer and a pizza for two? $10. It didn't matter what the beer was. Beer and wings, beer and burger, etc. It was amazing. Awesome bartenders that knew what they were doing. Awesome patrons who were friendly. Actually got my job as an associate architect by meeting someone there. Awesome atmosphere. And while I drank, the girlfriend can go shopping and then join me afterwards. But they wrecked it. They remodeled, which is a fancy way of saying that they were removing all of the awesome things that we liked and just turned it into a smaller restaurant with 15 seats in total. You can only order from the restaurant and can't bring in grocery food or beer or wine. They turned over their entire staff, prices went up, and specials are no longer a thing. God. This is in Florida when I lived there. Also, the way I understood it, they were either profiting or at the very least breaking even depending on the time of year. I think the bar was supposed to be set up as a loss leader originally anyway, but it actually ended up doing very, very well, so they'd been talking about expanding it for a while. They first added a fee of $2.50 to cook whatever, which is fine, I understand that, but the rest of it sucked. I do not shop at Whole Foods anymore, it was out of the way and the prices aren't the best. I'm sure they lost a lot of other customers like me. Well, having the workers cook the food you just bought off the shelf sounds way too good to be true in the first place. Apple Magic Mouse. When you could use AA batteries, it was perfect. Then they swapped that for internal rechargeable batteries. Okay, so far so good, but then they put the fricking charger point underneath the mouse. Some F-wit designer at Apple didn't want to put the charging point on the front of the mouse so that you could actually use it while it charges, because people might end up using it as a corded mouse. They deliberately disabled the mouse for the entire time you have to charge it, meaning you have to use a second mouse while you charge it. Unbelievable. The Windows Tile Start menu. If I'm on a PC, I don't need a menu that looks like it's built for tablets. And if I'm deploying 15,000 Windows machines to be used solely for business, 0 of them need Candy Crush installed. If I'm building PCs to play video games on, 0 of them need Candy Crush installed. No PCs should ever have Candy Crush on them. Keurig Cup Verification. Every time YouTube changes its layouts. I rage every time, yet I can't even remember what the last layout looked like. Every update from Outlook or Hotmail in the past few years. iTunes used to be awesome, but literally every update to it has left it worse and worse. The last non-horrible one was in 2013. They've made it so much more complicated to download old CDs and then put them in a device. Guys, I'm not rebuying hundreds of albums again. Quit being jerks. I remember when iTunes let you stream your library, you could go to work and just connect back home and listen to all your music. It was amazing. Yeah, we built up libraries based on our friends' libraries and just had mega collections, but it was amazing. I don't even know if they do library sharing anymore. Shapes. It's a national meme in Australia. The new ones are absolutely disgusting. Fortunately, they decided to restock the old ones. Thank God that some companies have humans running them. I remember living in the Southern Hemisphere, and along with Tim Tams, shapes were a culinary highlight of existing there. Glad to hear that they heard sense. Netflix changing their ratings from stars to match percentage. I hate it. Also, when you're looking at titles, the trailer starts playing right away. I hate that too.
I hate the percentages too, but even worse, the plots they give. She never knew that becoming herself could change everything about the world around her. I just made that up, but that's basically the amount of information they give you about almost every movie. And yet they have no problem showing plot-sensitive information in the little trailer reel that autoplays without a choice in the matter.
I get that there's a statute of limitations for spoilers on old movies, but come on! There's an award-winning trilogy on Netflix with a character who dies in the first movie, and yet they show up in the first clip of their stupid autoplay reel for the second movie. Like, oh geez, I wonder who comes back to life now. I'd be annoyed if I was watching those for the first time. UIs that have all of the options and buttons tucked away to make it look clean and minimal. It's like every designer is afraid of showing users more than 8 buttons at a time, even if it isn't practical. CNN and BBC autoplay videos. CNN is particularly egregious because the video follows you as you scroll through the article. Replacing the waxed paper wrappers on Reese's peanut butter cups with plastic ones prevented them from drying out, but it also made them wet and oily. Give me the old, slightly crunchy, slightly bloomed version any day. Also, Hershey's chocolate bars are nothing like the ones from the 1970s, partially for similar reasons. Removing the broken footstep tracker in Pokemon Go. It worked originally, so instead of fixing it, they spent months making a crappier one. That whole app is filled with improvements. They were so focused on adding codes to prevent third-party tracking that they made the game unnecessarily more demanding on your hardware. Walks out of a building? Are you a passenger? Switching Coke from glass bottles to plastic. Plastic is the worst when drinking it. Glass is the best and keeps it cooler. Aluminium cans are second best. Plastic last by far. Costco smoothies. Growing up, they were amazing. Suddenly, this year they came out with a healthier version that tasted like crap. Such a bummer. Why did they do that? Obviously, this 2-foot-long hot dog, greasy pizza, and syrupy smoothie isn't healthy. What in the frick? What family secret was finally spilled in your family? That my parents had to get married. They'd always told us they got married in 1961, but it was 1962, 3 months before my sister was born. What's amusing is that my father was an accountant who was insanely fast with math. Whenever he was asked how many years they'd been married, he'd be off by 1. My mother would correct him through clenched teeth, and then my father would nod and agree. When my paternal grandfather died, the federal government reached out to do a state funeral. He had been career army and a colonel, so we didn't question it. Then the funeral came and they went all out. Huge procession, people showing up who were really big names, like heads of departments, senators, retired senators, people from the CIA and State Department. It was nuts, and we were all super confused. Turns out he was a key dude in the OSI during World War II, and when the OSI splintered into the CIA and Secret Service, he went the Secret Service route. He wasn't on White House detail, but instead worked in a covert office that dealt with counterfeiting and currency. He went blind when I was a toddler and retired from the army. For whatever reason, he told no one about all his covert work with the OSI and Secret Service, and the only person who knew, my grandmother, was sworn to secrecy and never told anyone. My father grew up thinking he was just a colonel working on base. Only after his death were we given all sorts of cool crap like publications by him, lectures given by him, and all kinds of things from various things he did and was known for. All I knew him as was a blind old man who was perpetually smoking, drinking, and being a crotchety geezer. Turns out he was a bad mother effer, and all but none of us knew. My great-grandmother wasn't actually Mexican, but was rather adopted by a Mexican family from a Chinese family who was being kicked out of Mexico when railroad construction was over. She always had more typically Asian features but only spoke Spanish and it was never really questioned. 23andMe is a hell of a thing. My mother is kid number 7 out of 10. My aunt, kid number 4, who was born in 1945, did her DNA test and found out that she has a different father from everyone else. She was devastated. There was always a rumor that there was an affair, but nobody talked about it. She has so many questions, but nobody's alive to answer her. My grandparents are first cousins. An uncle on the same side of the family is in prison for the assassination of a Mexican presidential candidate in the 90s. His family still says he was framed and is innocent. Oh boy, way to lead with a kind of eyebrow-raising secret and then completely overshadow it with a tale of murder and corruption. Has anyone made a movie about your family? This is kind of messed up, but my parents told me my mum had a bad back because I pushed on her spine during birth. This is what I thought all my childhood. I think I was in my teens when my older brother told me my dad pushed my mum during an argument and she fell and had to have surgery. I thought I ruined my mum's back my entire childhood and those SOBs let me believe it. When I was 5 years old in 1988, Santa Claus left a Nintendo on our front porch. It was wrapped in newspaper, and my parents had no idea who gifted it to us. My dad particularly tried to figure it out. He was always suspicious that it had been a family friend. It was by far the best gift of the year, and we played it all the time throughout our childhood. My dad died in 2004. Last Christmas, my mum explained that she was the one who had bought it and surreptitiously placed it on the front porch. My dad really likes to be in control of things and had forbidden the purchase. She knew better. She didn't tell a soul for 30 years. Thanks, Mum. I see a lot of stories about people finding out that who they thought were their parents weren't the people raising them, and this one is a little bit different. My dad always thought his father who raised him wasn't his biological dad, and the father thought the same. He was treated terribly by his father because the father was told he couldn't have children and my father was born prematurely, but at a healthy weight. So everyone assumed that my grandmother had an affair and got pregnant with my dad. It was to the point where after my grandmother died, my grandfather failed to even mention to his new wife that he had a son and grandchild, me. Years later, my dad gets an ancestry DNA test for him and me. He finds out that his dad was actually his bio-dad. It was shocking and sad. Found out that my grandma had a baby as a teenager and was forced to give him up for adoption by my great-grandparents. 40 years later, he found us. The same thing happened to my mom. I'm 33 now. Older half-brother is roughly 35. I hold hope that I'll meet him one day. My father's brother killed 4 people when he was in high school. My father was the one who found out and told the police. My de facto uncle, he and my aunt never married but have been together since well before I was born, with a few hiccups, has a child with another woman. It became common knowledge when the girl was 6 and was starting to understand the situation. At first, it was a bit scandalous, but she's been welcomed with open arms by my entire family, including her half-siblings' maternal grandparents. She's treated the same as all the other kids her age. Her half-sister, my cousin, has a daughter the same age and they're best friends and go to the same high school, totally inseparable, technically aunt and niece. She comes to all our family events and she's an awesome kid. We're all stoked to have her in our family. After my mum died, I found out the real story behind my grandparents' marriage. She came to my father's country to visit some of her relatives. Met my father, and after just 1 week, she asked him to marry her so she could stay in the country. My father accepted because he had no one else, and his parents were pressing him to get married already. But the highlight of the story is that over some time, the two of them fell in love with each other. Their love only grew over the time, and they were really happy together. My mother spent her last days very ill, and she would accept only my father by her bedside. He swears to this day that she was an angel sent from God to take care of him. I'm shocked that they got married just like that, out of the blue, and ended up loving each other so deeply. I can only hope to have as good and loving marriage as they had. My uncles are infamous criminals who killed multiple people. I thought they bred dogs. Well, they may have also bred dogs. Ha! My mum's family, she always heard that her uncles were at Ohio State since she was a teenager, and never learned until she was in her 30s that it was actually Ohio State Penitentiary because they were in the mob. About a month ago, my mother-in-law's 88-year-old sister revealed on her deathbed that her husband's best friend was actually the father of all 4 of her children. Her husband was a bullying grade-A jerk by all accounts. While everyone was shocked, no one was saddened by this news. Did the friend know? Yes, he contacted with all 4 of the children, the youngest is in his 50s, within hours of her passing. Also, one of the son's first comments was, "Is that why he gave me his old car when I needed one back in college?" My uncle served in Vietnam. While over there, his troop found a baby that had been orphaned or abandoned. They're not sure. My uncle was shipping back to Australia soon and wanted to adopt him, but my aunt said no. They'd only been married about 4 months when he was drafted, so while I don't agree with my aunt's actions and generally don't like her as a person, I can understand why she said no. My uncle's troop found a family to raise the baby, and that's the story the whole family knows. To clarify, I'm child-free, and if my husband was in this situation, I'd probably say no as well. It's not the fact she said no to adopting the kid that makes me dislike her for this, it's her reason. She's very racist against Asian people. Doesn't matter what part of Asia, she hates them. She's the kind of person who will yell, "Go back to your country!" at random strangers who even vaguely look like they might have Asian ancestry. She also cut off contact with my cousin, her daughter, because my cousin's husband is half Japanese. She said in front of my family with no shame that if the kid hadn't been Asian, she would have said yes to adopting him. The secret is that my uncle and some other guys from his troop stayed in contact with the family and the kid, sending them money every month to help raise him and then help him go to university, and eventually helped him and his adoptive family move to Australia in the late 90s. My aunt and the rest of my family had no idea all this time. It only came out when my aunt and uncle divorced in 2017 and she had a forensic accountant go through their bank records. She worked at a bank for like 40 years and always noticed the money missing, but his reasons were always justified. Since we all know now, my uncle has introduced some of us to this guy and his family. They're really lovely people. It sounds like everyone won at some point in the story. The kid won by not being adopted by this woman and being financially supported. The family won by being introduced to the kid later in life, and the uncle won by divorcing the aunt. Everyone wins. We found out after my grandfather died that none of his 7 children with my grandmother were his, and that they all likely had different fathers. I only just recently heard about this, but my grandmother had gotten a little drunk with my dad and brother a month or so ago and started talking about our great-uncle Ferber. And from what I heard, he apparently killed quite a few people and buried them on some family-owned land in a swamp. The nanny I had when I was younger was actually my dad's attempted sister wife. She found out how bat-crap crazy he was and dipped. He's into polygamy and nearly had her convinced to be their third and everything. She came to her senses, thank God. He's not a nice man. My great-grandfather didn't die of cancer. He died from complications after being shot when one of his businesses was being robbed. Or so we'd heard. He also spent a lot of time in Atlantic City. He also had a lot of partners in Teamsters and other unions in coal country. Also, everyone called him Smiling Tony, but his name wasn't Tony. He died in the 60s, long before my time, but when my great-grandmother died 20 years ago, a very old guy showed up to the funeral in a white suit and all of the oldest people in my family kissed his hand. When I asked, no one knew who he was. My grandfather moved his family away from central Pennsylvania in the late 60s and disconnected from all of this. But there it is. I always wonder how long it will be before my neighbors figure out their daddy is a dealer or a little crooked. There was that one time in Christmas he got shot in the leg stealing from a farm and hobbled around for weeks. He's trying to go straight right now. I heard an absolute blowout fight like 2 months ago. As soon as the bigger kids left with the grandparents, the missus was smoking ice in the house, and he screamed at her about not doing that in the house, not wanting the kids to see. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was 28, I found out that my dad was not my biological father. The news came out via the following. My dad was battling depression and a number of other serious problems, so I had just flown home to try and take care of him and rescue him from my mum's wrath. My mum had verbally and emotionally beaten him down during their entire relationship. He loved her so much and he tolerated it. Well, during a solemn walk with my dad, as I tried to help him out, he confided that he's not my bio-dad. And he went on to tell me that he knew this all along, but my mum lied to him and tried to convince him that he was my bio-dad. He knew he wasn't, but he wanted to play the role. When I was 10 years old, my mum finally confessed this to him, and he was worried that upon hearing the news officially, he'd somehow let this affect his relationship with me. So when I was 28 years old, during this walk with my dad, as he pours out the story to me, he frames it by telling me that his 2 most proud moments in his life are 1. How I turned out and his raising me, and 2. That he had completely forgotten about the news my mum told him earlier in that day, when I was 10, about him not being my bio-dad, and that it was only upon tucking me in at night, when I was 10, that it briefly crossed his mind. It was at that point that he knew nothing would ever come between us and our father-son relationship would be as awesome as ever. He also confided that my mum did hard substances while pregnant with me, and this broke his heart to witness firsthand. They were very poor. My dad grew up in a foster home without parents. My mum grew up with 6 siblings and ill-equipped parents. She dropped out of 9th grade, whereas all of her other siblings dropped out earlier. Many of them are barely literate. I'm now mid-30s and tragically, my dad ended things in mid-March 2020, right as COVID was hitting. I was out of the country at the time, but immediately flew 30 hours, 30-minute layover, and made it in time for his funeral. I do everything in his honor. My grandmother recently died. She was famous in our town for her amazing cooking and catering, in particular her turkey dinners. Notably, her gravy was absolutely amazing, so delicious. She had a heart attack several years ago, and her near-death experience convinced her to share some of her secret recipes with me, all except for her gravy recipe. When she died this spring, I was going through her pantry and found an entire bucket of KFC gravy mix. She was literally using KFC gravy mix as a base to make her incredible gravy. Huge scandal. Faking gravy has got to be the most charming family secret out of all the horrible crap in this story group. My great-great-grandfather was exiled and banned from Missouri for being a sheep thief. We went to my grandmother's for Christmas dinner like we did every year, and my uncle drank too much and kind of hinted that he had an affair with my mother. A couple of months and 2 DNA tests later, we found out my sister is actually his daughter. My dad never spoke to his brother again, and of course my parents got divorced, and I needed a lot of therapy and chocolate. God, we're trash. Great-grandparents' 60th anniversary party at a hotel ballroom with my cousins and second cousins who hadn't seen each other in years. My mum and I were talking to my grandfather. My mum said, "Wow, I haven't seen Chuck, Fred, and Claire in years." Me, "No kidding. When do you think we'll get a group this big back together again?" Mum said, "Gramps' birthday is in 6 months. We'll see some people then." 6 months? Isn't it his 60th? There was a long silence, and then Gramps said, "I never thought about that." My grandfather was 60 when he realized his parents had a shotgun wedding. I was 35 when my mother finally admitted to me that she had been lying about who my birth father was. She waited until after I'd reached out to his other children, and we all thought we were siblings. He later confirmed I wasn't his. She refused to tell me who my biological father really was. When my sister was diagnosed with cancer and her survival chances were low, it inevitably came out that she wasn't my sister. My parents must have felt we should all know the truth just in case. She survived treatment and will always be my sister. I found out my uncle is actually my brother, but my mum had him when she was so young that my grandparents raised him. Due to 23andMe, my dad learned that his recently deceased father wasn't actually his bio-dad. It wasn't a situation related to grandma cheating either, it was a donation, so they knew this was the case his entire life. Pretty crazy that they never told him. His parents didn't pass until he was 65 years old. Talk about a curveball. Well, we all knew that there would be a bunch of infidelity and surprise relatives in this particular story grouping, so excuse me for choosing one of the few that wasn't depressing. My mum and older brother are not biologically related to me. My bio-mum died sometime after I was born, leaving me, my sister, and my dad behind. My brother was the one that told me. My parents never told me because they wanted to protect me from the truth, but my brother thought that was a bullcrap reason for me not to know. I don't know if my parents know that I know the truth, but I don't want to bring it up either. My mum had immigrated here along with my older brother when he was a kid. My dad also immigrated here, and my sister and I were born after he came. I don't know much about our family history beyond that. My brother revealed this info when I was about 18. He isn't the type to lie about something like this. He also said my sister is apparently aware of the truth because she has a memory of my bio-mum being in physical contact with her. I don't think too differently about my family because of this. My mum is still my mum. My grandma didn't drive. I thought she couldn't, but it was just never discussed. One day when I was maybe 7 or 8, I'd been trying to get anyone, to drive me to the store for candy. We were visiting my aunt and uncle. Grandma lived with them. They had bitter honey at the local store, which I could no longer get at home. But no one would take me to the store. Finally, I said I'd just ask Grandma, and my cousin chimes in with, "Grandma can't drive." "Oh, you bet your sweet butt I can drive, they just don't let me." Grandma had overheard and she was in high dudgeon. But that's all that was said about it, and my aunt finally took me to the store, so I forgot about it. Years later, when I'd just gotten my license, I asked my mum what was up with Grandma not driving. She explained that during Prohibition times, Grandma bootlegged alcohol for moonshiners. She was very successful at it. She was so successful at it that when the moonshiners were finally busted, even though the revenuers never caught my grandma, her license was suspended by the state to never be reissued. Later in life, she was told she could petition for it back, but it came with an admission of guilt or some such. She told them to go to hell. The scars on an elder family's wrists were not from a botched attempt at their own life. They were from her mum trying to protect herself and her kids from the approaching Red Army. That was at the end of World War II in Germany. This made it so much worse. My dad fathered a child in high school. His side of the family knew, and my mum. We found out years after he had died that we have a half-sister. Here's how we found out. Dad got a girl pregnant and she decided to go it alone. She moved across the state and had my half-sister. She met a guy, married, and he raised her like she was his own. They had no other children. She didn't reveal my dad's identity until after he died. Apparently, she contacted my grandma and mum, but they kept it from us. Years later, half-sister has a kid with medical issues and needs to know the family medical history. She contacts mum and grandma, who again don't tell us. Meanwhile, after Dad died, my uncle had prints made of a favorite picture of Dad. He gets them framed and gives them to all us kids as well as my grandma, aunts and uncles. Mum gets a picture to our half-sister after their secret meeting. Fast forward another few years, my brother and his roommate live in a large nearby city and hit a bar and pick up and bring home some ladies to sleep over. The next morning, my half-sister sees a photo of my dad on the mantle, turns white and asks, "Whose picture is that?" "That's my roommate's dad. He died a long time ago." "I need to talk to your roommate." She lived her entire life across state, hundreds of miles. Her friend was going to school in a large city near our hometown. She was visiting and they decided to go to a bar. They got picked up by my brother and his roommate. That's how we found out. My brother went to my grandma and asked. After my grandfather passed, we found out that he'd fathered a child when he was posted in Italy during World War II. He never knew. His mother intercepted any letters from the Italian girl. He came home, met and married my grandmother, and had 4 children. I forget who in the family found out and how. It's crazy to think that we have a whole Italian family out there. My oldest aunt is 77, so this kid would be at least 79 by now, I would think. We've considered doing the DNA testing, but some family members aren't comfortable with how those companies could use the information. It's a really sad story, but if his mother hadn't intercepted the letters, I wouldn't exist. It's a weird place to be in emotionally. My sister cheated on her husband throughout her entire marriage to the point that all 3 of her kids have different biological fathers. That my grandfather was an atomic soldier. Instead of sending him to fight in the Korean War, they sent him to Nevada, where, after having him turn away from the initial flash, he witnessed the mushroom cloud. After that was over, he was ordered to march to the detonation point, where he was unwittingly exposed to high amounts of radiation. Luckily for my family, my grandpa is now in his 90s, even after a few cancer scares. And the rest of us, my mum, aunt, cousins, sister, and I, are cancer-free and fairly healthy. But this is medical information that we really should have known earlier. What budget purchase ended up being your best buy ever? I was traveling in Japan and needed nail clippers. All I could find is this cheap pink Hello Kitty grooming kit. These clippers are the best I've ever owned. They have stayed sharp and functional for 20 years. I'm very protective of them. Everyone in the house knows you don't touch Dad's pink Hello Kitty nail clippers. And if you do, you perish. A guy said there were a bunch of bricks in his backyard he wanted to get rid of. $5 for all of them if you'd come and pick them up because they were larger than regular bricks and very heavy. I grabbed a friend and headed out because I needed some cheap bricks for the edging of my garden. Guy's house was across the river and in some really run-down looking neighborhood. Really glad I grabbed my friend at this point. We pull up and the guy is waiting outside. He looks like he's 80, but I know he must have been a 35-year-old guy who just smoked 10 packs a day. So the guy takes us to his backyard and shows us the pile of bricks, which turns out to be 50-plus antique Louisville fire bricks. So I look at the guy and tell him, "I'll take half of them, and as payment I'll give you $20 and some advice." And of course, the guy is looking at me like I'm an idiot, but he accepts my money and helps me and my friend load up about 30 bricks. After I close my truck and get in the car to drive off, I tell him to Google the antique fire bricks and adjust his Craigslist listing. I went back to look at the listing a few days later, and he had changed the price from $5 for the whole pile to $5 per brick, which was the going rate at the time. Nowadays, they go for $20 per brick. Best buy ever. A seed packet from the dollar store. While in college, my boyfriend and I were broke. Really broke. But I still wanted to do something to celebrate spring. We were getting a few cheap things at the dollar store when I noticed they were selling these seed packets from a big old bin that you had to dig through. 4 for $1. No tax. I immediately begged to buy one despite our strict budget. Boyfriend was incredulous I'd want to buy sketchy seeds, but dutifully handed me a quarter. I ended up picking out tomatoes. Well, we got home and I carefully placed about 3 seeds in washed out cans. I watered them and watched them sprout. I loved tending to my little garden. I ended up with 3 beautiful, huge tomato plants. It was a bumper crop, more than we could eat. I sold the extra produce to my classmates. I made about $25. Good seeds. For the umpteenth time, the narrator is resisting the urge to buy a plot of land, some seeds, and live out his Stardew Valley dreams. Not yet, not yet. My dad bought me a flannel jacket for $2 from the equivalent of a dollar store in 1994. Wore it for everything you can think of. I wore it yesterday. Still going strong after 25 years.
It's amazing that the jacket held up, yes, but special kudos to you for still being able to fit in it for 25 years.
I was traveling from a different city straight into work, where my uniform was a white shirt with a conspicuously black bra. Wasn't stopping home, so I did stop on the first corner store I found and bought a $5 white bra that looked roughly my size, as they had nowhere to try them on, just to wear for one night at work. 10 out of 10, comfiest bra I ever owned. Wore it every day of my life for about a year. It gave in at some point, but it was still a $5 bra. But gosh darn, I dream of the day when all of my bras fit that well. I too have a bra of mystery. First strike, I brought it from a grocery store. Second strike, it was marked down to $2 and plastered with stickers reading, "Final sale, no returns. We're not liable if this kills you. I'm sure there are people who love you," and the like. Third strike, upon ringing it through, the cashier did a double take at the screen, looked at me with great concern, and asked if I was sure I wanted to buy it. After failing to self-combust and send me straight to hell, it wound up being one of the nicest bras I ever had. Wore it for 2 years before the inevitable underwire chest shanking. I still wonder what they thought was wrong with it. I was giving these college-aged women a Lyft ride. One asks how that Craigslist thing went, so my ears perked up. The other says something like, "He complained it went back too far, just don't put it back so far, duh." Eventually I deduce that they're talking about a recliner, which I've been looking for one for some time now. I interject and ask about it. The lady has a Lazy Boy electric recliner she just wants $20 for. I'm like, "Listen, I know it's sketchy, but if you've got Craigslist randos in your house, Lyft at least gave me a background check." We pull up, I end the ride and follow these ladies into their house. I knew I wanted it as soon as I laid eyes on it, so this college chick is helping me stuff a recliner into my back seat, and all I can think this is how Buffalo Bill kidnapped that girl in Silence of the Lambs. $20 for a recliner so lazy it reclines for me. The seller listed several 2-month-old kittens on Craigslist, first come, first serve. We pull up to an area of town known for its high crime and substance addicts at like 11 at night. Seller plops this impossibly tiny kitten into my hand wordlessly. She was only 3 weeks old, and the seller gave us some crap about how her sister's cat just had kittens, and she didn't want to make a whole new post about it. Kittens were listed for $10. The seller was asking for $15. All we had was a $20. I looked at my now fiancé, and we knew no one else was going to take care of this cat. We drove that kitten home in a laundry basket. Nearly 3 years later, that kitten is attached to my hip, and I can't think of a better $20 investment. I too bought my kitty for $20 on Craigslist from a legit crystal addict. I'd never had a cat before, and this little meow factory has been my best friend ever since. A no-label old beat-to-crap vinyl acetate record with handwritten "That'll be the day" on it. Paid $1. Ended up being a live Buddy Holly recording. I sold it for $970. I bought a blanket in Mexico in 1986 for $5. I still have it and it's super soft and comfy. It's been abused, washed, and other things, and it's still in great shape. $12 rain boots at Value Village. I've thrashed these things living in rural Alaska, and they're still totally watertight 2 years later. Stain removers from the dollar store are surprisingly effective. I bought a tub of toothpaste called Right Clean, and then when I looked closely, the cap said Colgate, so I'm guessing companies sell their excess supply to dollar stores and just relabel the contents. I work as a day laborer at a plant that made mayonnaise. We probably made 30 different brands of mayo from store brands to national brands. They would stop the filling machine, we would change the bottles, caps, and labels, then keep right on running putting the same stuff out of the same vats into all the different bottles. I heard the same thing from a person who worked in a green bean factory. They'd just slap a different label and keep it rolling. I bought a small turtle from a gas station in Florida when I was in the 1st grade. Max proudly lived until the end of my senior year. I am loving all the cute pet stories coming out of this story grouping. Honestly, I just assumed it would be all Walmart and eBay finds. At the end of a long road trip with some mates, I brought a $20 pair of sunglasses in a gas station just outside Chicago. They fit me better than any pair of sunglasses ever did or ever will, and they made me look awesome. For years, I constantly received compliments about them and was asked where I got them. I lost them after 5 long years and have hated myself for it ever since. They were so no-name they didn't even have a brand name on them at all. So I have no idea who made them. I have no way of finding that gas station either. I've literally spent hundreds of bucks trying to find sunglasses that came close to that perfect fit and style, but I can't. I randomly found a wedding videographer online and booked him for a very affordable rate for my wedding, assuming it wouldn't be very good quality. 2 weeks after the wedding, he emails me a high-quality, well-edited video. He had a drone I hadn't noticed because he was outside of the venue getting B-roll with it before I even started getting ready for my big day. I was floored, and now I recommend him to everyone who ever plans to get married, ever. To update, he's definitely upped his prices since then, and rightfully so, because he does great work. He did the videography from my wedding last summer. I drive cars so old they all still have tape decks. I bought this fake cassette tape with a headphone-style plug that comes off it. You put the tape in the player just like it was a cassette and plug the jack into your phone, and it uses the car's speaker system as an external speaker for the phone. I was so skeptical of it working because it was all of $5 and I've been using it at least 10 years and it works perfectly and beautifully. Plus bonus side-eye every time I pull it out to use it with someone new in the car. I bought a $17 toaster about 20 years ago and it's still going strong. I went to buy a used lawnmower and ended up buying their very old dog for $10. He had never been allowed indoors, never rode in a car, went to a park or had a bath. We had a good 5 years of firsts. Best $10 I ever spent. I bought a button-down shirt from the thrift store in the mid-90s and I still wear it today. The shirt is obviously even older. It doesn't have much wear on it either. I think it's made of rayon or something else. The brand is Kmart. They don't make them like they used to. A little $40 speaker set for my bedroom TV I got in 2006 and still works great in 2019. I bought a fake wood, plastic mantel clock from Value City for about $10 because I needed something for my first apartment. I received a surprising number of compliments on it and was asked more than once if it was a family heirloom because it looked so old. It also lasted for about 10 years until some movers broke it. I was kind of proud of displaying that stupid cheap clock. I was in a market in Shanghai, one of those ones that attracts foreigners with knockoffs of nice brands, where you're supposed to haggle a bit with the store owner. Walked into an electronics store looking for a portable speaker. Negotiated the store owner down over the JBL speaker that basically was the size of a thermos. I think she originally wanted 200 yuan for it, and I got it for 125. The exchange rate was about 6.5 yuan for $1, so it was about $21. The owner went out back and got a blank white box and an envelope. Inside the box was a blank speaker without decals. Decals were in the envelope. She then proceeded to put the decals on the speaker in front of me, using tweezers for precision. This was my very first time in China, so it really caught me off guard. The speaker is actually amazing. Very loud, 6 to 8 hours battery life, and perfect for storing in a cup holder. I mostly use it on a golf course, which is perfect. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We bought an Ellis Island boat tour in New York from one of the guys on the streets. We were led into a van and treated extremely well, so we weren't immediately sketched out too badly. We don't know New York, so we ended up driving 20 minutes through Manhattan by 3 men to an apparently abandoned sketchy dock with no one else there. That's when we were convinced we were being scammed or sold into human trafficking. Gave us a post-it note with a number and they said to go around the abandoned factory to the pier and they were waiting for us. So we took our naive tourist butts around the building, alone, expecting nothing and they would just pull off and scam us. Sure enough, we turned the corner and there was a big boat with a bunch of people and it was legit. We had an amazing tour and a lot of fun with free food and drinks. So overall, a great decision, but in hindsight, we should have been murdered or at least scammed.
I risked a huge box of magic cards. I spent around $200. It easily came out to about $2,000 or $3,000 worth. This box was just a random pickup on the internet from Craigslist.
My best purchase of magic cards was a store under new management. I went in with my 2 elementary school-aged sons, as a mother that taught them to play, and I asked to purchase the 2 large boxes in bulk. But because they had not had time to catalog their cards, they agreed on 10 cents apiece. At least 2 of the cards combined were valued at $80, and I bought hundreds. It's been some years since I've played, at least 3 or 4 years since I've purchased any. I wonder how much they're valued at, but I don't have the heart to part from them. I started playing in '97, and I have cards prior to that. Fugly or sad and misshapen potted plants from the grocery store. They just need some love, and it's so fun to see them grow. This person is a dark mirror of the narrator who consistently buys nice plants and proceeds to kill them all over a period of weeks. Teach me your secrets, internet person. A $27 dashcam. I got it off Amazon. Its shaper image included an SD card and was $27. I thought it was going to be a waste. It wasn't. I have it on whenever I drive. Turns on automatically. Records automatically. You can turn auto rewrite on or off. Has a high-quality camera, infrared LEDs for nighttime driving, and the mounting mechanism works great. It's stable and has never fallen. It's not 4K recording, but it's 1080, high 120 FPS, and was $27. When some others can run up into the high hundreds, 10 out of 10 would buy again. 10 out of 10 would gift to someone. It actually works great and was $27. My dog was a stray, adopted by a couple but returned because he was too high energy. So his adoption fees were 50%, the best $45 I've ever spent. I went to Mexico a few years back with my family, and it was our first time there. We only left the hotel once because it was so gosh darn hot. On that day, after visiting an ancient temple, we decided to go to a cenote to swim and cool off. We arrived at the bus station, and this kinda sketchy taxi driver approached us and asked where we wanted to go. My father mentioned a very popular cenote, but the taxi driver recommended a quieter place and said he'd do it for half price, even though it was already dirt cheap. For some reason, my father agreed, which I thought was mad, so me and my family got in his taxi and drove off. We were riding down the freeway when he starts indicating left. I see no road where he's indicating. We turn off onto a dirt track and into the jungle. For about 10 minutes, we were getting deeper and deeper into the jungle until we reach a house. My father is told to get out and pay at this small shack, and the rest of us aren't allowed out of the car. 5 minutes pass, and by this time we're freaking out in the car. I didn't really feel like getting kidnapped or anything, but my father returns and we continue into the jungle. Soon we reach a clearing with a few people smoking around a table, and a couple with swimsuits on. Now I'm a bit more relaxed because there are other customers there. After getting changed, we have a short walk to this beautiful, crystal-clear cenote with overhangs and plants hanging down. It was amazing. We got out and thought money well spent, but then we were led on a tour around 4 other cenotes where we swam under bats hanging in caves and learnt about the history of the cenotes. To top it off, I got to jump off a 10-foot drop into a pool where I could see the bottom about 20 feet below the surface. Best experience we had in Mexico, and I'd love to go back, but I don't think I've ever been so frightened as I was going down that deserted dirt road. Went to a garage sale. There was a little girl in charge. She's like 12. I don't know crap about turntables, but she has a set on a table. I ask how much, and she tells me $20. I ask her if they work, and she tells me she has no idea. Her dad got new ones and wanted to get rid of these. I wait for Dad, and she tells me he's sleeping. She says, "Dude, just take them." I'm like, no, $20 can't be right, maybe $200? She looks at me like I'm stupid. Fine, I'll take them for $20. I drive straight to the pawn shop and see what I can get for them, or if they even work. They frickin' work. The guy looks up prices and comes back with a $1,200 offer. The best $20 I've ever spent. I bought this shirt from a market for $5. It fits so darn well I've started using it as my main shirt. Knockoff North Face hiking shoes in Vietnam. They cost me $20. Kicked the crap out of them and they're still going strong. Bought some Britney Spears tickets in a back alley near the Phillips Arena, downtown Atlanta, from this sketchy guy. Our dumb butts were all excited because it was a great deal for the seating. Keep in mind, this is when tickets were printed from home, and they're huge to scan. The pair that we brought were the OG Ticketmaster tickets, you know, the tiny pair that you had to wait at FYE in the mall for. I got in line and go through the main door and they don't scan. Frick. We knew we were scammed immediately. Then they physically examine our tickets and say, "I don't know why these aren't scanning, but your seats are that way." Walk all the way down to our numbered section, and there's one guy sitting in a chair by this massive wall with a single door to walk through. Homeboy physically examined our ghetto tickets. He's like, never seen these before. But he said, "This way, please," and I'll be damned. We're seated in the section where the local businesses buy the sweets and crap for their employees. Food and alcohol was free. We had phenomenal seats and got a free shirt and program. I still can't believe it happened. Not my purchase, but still one of the best. My brother gifted me a Snuggie one year for Christmas. I had painstakingly tracked down a bootleg album he wanted, and he got me a buy one, get one free Snuggie. I didn't speak to him for weeks. I've routinely used that damn Snuggie for every camping trip I've been on for the last 7 years, and I'll tell you it's become the most useful gift I've ever gotten. I bought official PlayStation wireless headphones for €20 a few years ago. They usually cost about €70 brand new. I thought it was a sketchy sale, but nope, they're fine and I still use them to this day. I got an adjustable phone mount at the dollar store when I had an iPhone 4. Still use the same one with my iPhone X. Well, that has to be the only case in recorded history of an iPhone accessory not being made redundant after 1 or 2 generations. $17 Target brand boat shoes. I bought them about 6 years ago, and I just wore them randomly for things like going to the grocery store or running down to my car. Then I found they were great practice shoes for disc golf. They lasted 1.5 years of planting and twisting on concrete before they finally folded. Went back and they've been discontinued for years. Rest in peace. Target continually changes their clothing section, so if you like something, buy multiples of it, because it'll be gone or rebranded in like 6 months. Costco fluffy flannels. It feels like a chinchilla is hugging you, and I've had mine for 3 years with no signs of wearing down, despite almost daily use in the northeast winters. My wife got this fluffy fleece blanket from Costco, short on one side, long on the other, and oh my fricking god, I let nobody touch it but me. Flight cargo escort for discounted tickets. I flew to Shanghai from New York for about $200 total, on JAL business class. In return, I had to sign to take responsibility for cargo on the flight. I saw the cargo on the loading dock. It was a pallet covered in camouflage tarp. I received my tickets in person upon arrival at JFK. I'm pretty sure I helped traffic substances or weapons across borders. I can't remember the name of the company. Also, I don't think it exists anymore because it was sketchy as F. So, how much did you pay the smuggler? Nothing. He actually paid me $200. This bamboo back scratcher my wife got me for $3 like 15 years ago. It's right here next to me. I use it to scratch my back, gesticulate when I pontificate, fend off my cats, annoy my cats, and use as a tuning fork to make strange noises to annoy my wife. I joke that in the event of a house fire, this back scratcher is the only thing besides my wife and cats that I'd take with me. That's not a joke though, I really would go for it first. One of those square, window-sized box fans. Technically wasn't a purchase. I found it outside the dumpster of my junior year college apartment back in 2008. I'm a fan of airflow and white noise, so that fan ran 24 hours a day for nearly 11 years, outside of when I was away on vacations and for brief periods in winter. Most of that on the lowest setting, but I mean there were long stretches of literally months where it wasn't turned off. It died in 2019 when I can only assume some critical component just burnt out. I'll miss you, completely free thing that provided me a decade of light breeze and air circulation. Life skills teachers. What's the craziest misconception that you've had to clear up? I remember being in grade 5 or 6, having the first life skills class of our young and budding 10-year-old lives, having the wonders of life explained to us. We got to the point of explaining how babies were made, and one of my classmates got hung up on a point. He raised his hand and asked the teacher, "Is splooge hot?" We all blankly stared at the teacher, waiting for an answer. She replied with an awkward, broken answer, "Well, it's not boiling or anything like that," but before she could continue, the classmate restated the question. "But is it like hot, like temperature hot?" The teacher, still confused, tried her best. "Well, no, it's not like tea or coffee. Haven't you felt it before?" Now, with us being 10, I don't know what she was thinking, but some of us laughed, some were grossed out, but that classmate was almost angry. "No, I haven't. But is it hot?" She ended up explaining to us that it would only be as hot as your body is. It turns out the kid was just worried about hurting future partners with his boiling hot splooge. Boiling hot splooge, dibs on the band name. taught human growth and development, aka life skills, to 5th and 6th grade boys. In our schools, you had to have a co-teacher with you, which happened to be my best friend as well. Mistake. The boys are encouraged to write out questions on note cards and turn them in, which makes them try to prank us and see if we'll read them out loud. Best one ever was, "What would happen if a man did the deed with a sheep?" To which my buddy replied, "Well, that would be bad." You always keep the good note cards. When I was little, the teacher passed out those note cards in life skills class so that we could anonymously ask questions and get the answers. I asked what a BJ was because I legitimately wanted to know. The teacher, I guess he was too embarrassed to answer, thought someone was trying to prank him and just laughed it off. I, to this day, still wonder what it is. But seriously, sometimes they sound like joke questions, but they aren't. Make a joke, sure, break the tension, but answer the question. I remember feeling so silly, like crap, everyone's laughing. I guess I'm really dumb for not knowing this already. The narrator considered reading out the Urban Dictionary description of said deed for the purposes of educating in this video. But let's be honest, if anything gets this video more likely to hit demonetization, it would be that. I'm gonna throw this one out there. They need to teach girls that urine doesn't come from the same hole that they do the deed in. I've dated 3 girls who were 20 plus at the time who never knew this. They actually went into the bathroom to see if I was lying to them. I'm curious how they thought the whole tampon thing worked. When I was in 4th grade, I thought men could only have 2 kids because they only had 2 testes. It made sense because every man I knew had 2 kids, except my buddy Greg had 2 siblings. Once I reached my revelation, I reasoned that Greg's mum must have cheated on his dad in order to have a 3rd kid. I would have just assumed Greg's dad had 3 testes. Taught in an inner-city classroom in Boston, these kids asked the best questions. Doesn't doing it in the butt cause cancer? I'd ask what HIV can lead to. Does it lead to blue waffle? I don't want to get that. Will Plan B work faster if you snort it? Good times. When my kids were in grammar school, a teacher came around and talked to them about their private places. For the next week or so, my daughters kept saying that they got hit in their privates. They were in 1st and 2nd grade, I think, so roughhousing was common, and I figured since it was a new phrase, they were using it as much as possible. Then one day, the youngest came in and said her sister wouldn't quit touching her in her privates. I was starting to freak out. I asked her to show me where her sister was touching. She pointed to her arm. I was flabbergasted and said, "How is that your privates?" She then informed me that the teacher who talked to them about bad touching said that a place that makes you feel uncomfortable was your privates, and that her sister was touching her arm and making her uncomfortable. After that, I got out my anatomy and physiology book from school and we had a much longer discussion about such things. My life skills teacher in high school told us stories about a female student she had a long time ago. The student got pregnant and was freaking out to our teacher not knowing what happened because she had apparently been taking birth control. My teacher was asking her the typical questions about her situation, how long she'd been taking them, among other things. Then later the girl mentions she had been taking her birth control pills up her hoo-ha. She figured that since the baby comes from there, that's where you take the pill. As a pharmacist, this is exactly why we put "take 1 tablet by mouth daily" or "take 1 teaspoonful by mouth" on the label. I had a mother pour an oral antibiotic suspension in her kid's ear for an earache once. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in a certain small sub-Saharan African country where life skills class was practically non-existent. Talking about that part of my life openly was a bit taboo, and misconceptions were everywhere. As the sole outsider in my village, I was assumed to be the local expert on everything, from computers to physics to world politics to calculus to, yes, doing the deed. There were so many myths, but one sticks in my mind because it was so bizarre, so prevalent, and I've never heard it anywhere else. Splooge is the only source of vitamin K, so girls must begin doing the deed at an early age to get proper nutrition. This was startling for a whole tangled mess of reasons. The cultural initiation rites that perpetuated the myth and coerced younger people to do the deed with men twice their age. The inverse relationship between prevalence of transmitted diseases and the degree of knowledge about preventing it, the enormous cultural pressure to marry young and have lots of babies, and the lack of knowledge about nutrition in general. Parents commonly ate balanced meals while their kids were only given a type of corn mash, believing that this was the only thing necessary to help them go strong. Basically, my students were already stunted from malnutrition, facing a lot of pressure to have to do the deed, and laboring under mountains of misinformation about the deed. But then there was this additional myth telling them that they needed to start having the deed without protection as soon as possible so their bodies would develop normally. I held talks at my school to combat this, taught them how to put protection on correctly, and gave some additional talks about nutrition for good measure. Oh man, the discussions we had. I'm no life skills teacher, but I went to a very sheltered private school that did not teach basic life skills. It only went as far as covering puberty, so parents had to fill in the rest. And then my mum effed it up pretty badly. She started by describing the male anatomy, wang first, then ballsack. But she never said the word for that organ again, only it. It gets so hard it can go inside a woman. And the whole time, having never seen what an adult member looks like, I assume she means the ball bag goes into the hoo-ha as well. And since I'd only seen a baby eggplant from daycare where the ball bag was actually bigger than the eggplant, it made sense. I thought this for several years until a friend cleared that misconception up. I was also unaware of thrusting. I thought you just put it in and waited a bit. I'm not a health ed teacher, but back in 8th grade I saw a girl crying in the ladies' room. I walked over and asked her what was wrong, and she told me she was bleeding down there and she legitimately thought she had internal damage and was dying. I had a friend that this happened to. She hid the bloody undies for months and was convinced that she had dropped dead at any time. Fortunately, I was in Girl Scouts and they were pretty good about letting all of us know what to expect. I'm a development support worker at a treatment home for dual-diagnosed teenage boys. As my co-workers and I basically raise these kids, we regularly field life skills questions. When I was pregnant, these were my two favorites.
So when the baby's big enough, you'll just poop it out, right? Is it a puppy?
English teacher here. Okay, not life skills, but you'd be surprised about the blurted statements during the Romeo and Juliet unit. So I had one girl who honestly believed she couldn't get pregnant if she didn't climax. Had one boy who thought that humans basically stopped growing hair down there in the 1980s. The poor guy actually thought he was going to be ridiculed in gym class. Freshmen are sometimes horrifyingly underinformed. Believed that you could get acquired immunodeficiency syndrome by being gay, not having unprotected intercourse, but just by being homosexual. My life skills teacher only misinformed my health class further. Told us you have a 90% chance of getting an STD if you have premarital woohoo, women can't have climaxes, so it's not worth doing the deed if you're a girl. Adult magazines and websites cause men to be abusive. Ugh. She started the class by asking, "Raise your hand if you think people who have done the deed before marriage are going to hell." I went to a public school in Alabama, obviously. And literally nobody was surprised. Still, this story was posted 10 years ago. I wonder if there has been any more progress in that particular area, or if we're still more or less at square -1 in that state. The misconceptions that I, as a 25-year-old female life skills teacher, would not A. consider going to prom with you, or B. share my personal bedroom history with you. I've also had to disprove the following notions. That men can't get transmissible diseases. That blue waffle is a real common transmissible disease. That you can't get pregnant if you wash yourself down there after doing the deed. That you can't get pregnant if you drink a lot of Mountain Dew. That if you take all of the birth controls, pills, Depot, Implanon, etc., at once, not that any doctor would give them all to you, you're uber protected from pregnancy. Oh, and a really common one, that 2 rubbers are better than 1. And on and on and on. Mostly I spend a lot of time answering really basic but highly personal and potentially embarrassing questions from my anonymous question box. My friend goes around high schools to give talks and answer questions about doing the deed as a teacher to 16-year-old girls. A girl began to cry once and told the teacher, and the whole class, that she was a hermaphrodite. After calming her down and explaining it all, she agreed to answer more questions for those curious. Turns out she was just talking about her fun button and thought it was a tiny male member. Needless to say, my friend handled it so well, but the girl probably had to change schools afterwards. I know of a girl who didn't know where babies came from. This was a friend of mine's cousin who was pregnant, but her mum had always had C-sections with her kids. So when she was told about the natural method of birthing a child, she freaked out. Well, it comes out the same way it went in. You've got to be joking. How can a woman get to a stage in her life where she's pregnant and not know?
Before C-sections, we just kind of popped out. They even made a dramatic documentary called Alien.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Well, kinda related. When I was little, I thought that maxi pads were meant so that a woman could pee themselves whenever they wanted. My dad and I were watching a commercial and I went on a tangent about how gross that was. He looked at me funny and said it was time we had a little talk. I was in a public bathroom in a large restaurant with my mother when I was approximately 10. As I was washing my hands, I noticed that there was a large metal dispenser on the wall for tampons $1 and napkins $1. As my mom was exiting her stall to come wash her hands too, I exclaimed, "Why would anyone pay $1 for a napkin when there's free napkins at their table?" I heard a lady in her stall snicker and my mom was a bit embarrassed. I knew what tampons and pads were, but I didn't know that napkin was a polite term for a pad. Maybe not exactly a misconception, but a girl asked me, "Is it true that when the man arrives, he pees in you as well?" It took all of my effort to not say something like, "Only if you ask him to." Probably wouldn't have gone over very well. I teach life skills to individuals with intellectual disabilities, so I get to clear up loads of crazy misconceptions. During my most recent one, I had to explain to a guy of relatively normal intelligence that girls do not have male anatomy down there. I watched his entire mind just explode to that new information. I'm pretty sure I changed his life. I know a girl in her 20s that honestly believed that males have an extra bone in their wang. She tried to defend herself by claiming that if it didn't, then why would it be called that when the guy was excited?
I mean, dogs literally have a bone in their member.
Many animals do. Also many primates, but for some reason it got lost during human evolution. By far the biggest and worst misunderstanding in life skills is the thought that not teaching kids about doing the deed makes it less likely that they'll get pregnant. During the talk at our school, one guy asked if one testy produced girl babies and the other produced boy babies. Looking back, it wasn't such a dumb question from the mind of a 10-year-old, but oh, how we laughed.
Nice little factoid, the Greeks believed this, and some tried to strangle the one that produced girls.
I'm a registered nurse. I was conducting a pre-op interview on a teenager who was going to have surgery. She was there with her mother, probably in her late 30s or early 40s, and I was asking basic health-related questions. Past medical history, surgical history, allergies, etc. At the end of the interview, the teen, looking kind of embarrassed, asked me, "How many holes do we have down there?" I answered, "Women have 3. Just then, the teen looks at her mum and explains, "See, Mum, I told you." And the mum looks confused and asks, "Are you sure it's 3? I tell her, yes, women have 3, vajayjay, urethra, butthole, and men have 2. The mother goes, "Men have 2? I was shocked. Long story short, I had to draw them a picture of female and male anatomy to drive the point home. They thought that women urinate from their hoo-has. I can see how the teen could be confused, but the mum was too. In college, I dated a 21-year-old Muslim girl who believed that sperm could rapidly swim up off the bedsheets, over her leg and down her hoo-ha, and through her cervix on their own like hungry, sentient parasites. Can you imagine if that crap was real and you had to swat and slap the splooge monsters to death off their faces and chests before the little B-words reached their targets? Also, you would be guaranteed to get pregnant from every hotel bed you ever laid in. And that statement is just making me think about that gross element of hotels and no thank you. One of the standards that we have to teach in our state, Kentucky, is that men produce sperm for the entirety of their lives, whereas women have a finite number of eggs. Generally, this gets into PMS, menopause, and a few similar subjects. For contextual purposes, I'll try to outline the classroom. This is a 7th grade classroom, 13-year-olds. 50% are below the poverty line, 50% Caucasian, and 20% Hispanic. The rest are various other races. 100% male as I was working with the males and another teacher was working with the females. So this particular child is a plump little boy. Really contemplative too. You can see him looking down to the ground, pondering and really working out something in his head every time he responds. So after I explain how older men can have babies but older women cannot, he just asks, "So you're telling me an old wrinkly man can have a baby?" To which I affirm yes. So the kid is just staring down, thinking for a while. After about a minute, he looks back up and says, "So if an old wrinkly man has a baby, does that mean the baby has wrinkles?" I honestly just about lost it. Then we had a conversation about how people being shot do not produce bullet-resistant babies. Also, every class for some reason responded with my question of, "What's the one way to not have a baby?" in the same gosh darn way. You wear 3 rubbers. Like, what the heck? We were taught life skills by our religious teachers, and in this case, our middle-aged, Jesus-loving teacher. It was always going to be an awkward affair in a mixed-gender school, boisterous lads showing off to the girls giggling, etc. The lesson was moving along as planned, but it was getting a tad boring. Questions were being fired, but nothing we didn't already know. Then the teacher had a brainwave, giving everyone a small piece of paper and asking us to write an anonymous question if we wanted to know something but were too afraid to ask. Within seconds, half the class is scribbling away. The papers go into a box and are picked out one by one. What is this strange buzzing wand my mum has? Quite a tame one, and the teacher was able to reel off a vicar-friendly answer, but it got progressively uglier. What's a BJ? What's prostate massaging? What's felching? It's worth noting that this was around 1994, so the internet was not an option. The teacher was backed into a corner, armed only with a book and a very basic knowledge of the deed as a reproductive tool. Lots of stuttering ensued. Watching a middle-aged woman explain to the class the finer points of manual stimulation still makes me raise a smile. I'm a teacher, but not normally a life skills teacher. My state is abstinence-only education, and so most of the life skills is limited at best. This may explain a 9th grade class I had 3 years ago with 4 mothers in it. Anyway, one of my students was convinced that if you jumped up and down after you had done the deed, you wouldn't get pregnant. Without using any words that would make me blush, I told her unequivocally that she was wrong and to not try that at home. Then another student raised her hand and essentially asked about the pull-out method. She didn't know the terminology. I told her again that was not a really reliable method, especially with teenage boys. Then a third student asked about doing the deed when you're not ovulating. She actually asked, what about having fun during some parts of the month and not others? I explained that teenage girls may or may not have a real reliable cycle, and being even a day off the rhythm method could result in pregnancy. Finally, after towing the company line, the only foolproof method is abstinence, and in the absence of abstinence, take care of yourself, a girl in my class sighs and says, "Well, I will just keep doing sit-ups after doing the deed." I kid you not. And some of these girls were AP college preparatory students. The best one I heard was from the nurse at our school who was explaining all of the diseases you can get from the hoo-ha, BJs, and doing it in the butt. A girl in the class raised her hand and said, "So that's where crack babies come from, right?" And the nurse asked her, "What?" And the girl said, "Crack babies, you know, from doing it in the butt." You've got to love abstinence-only education in an overly religious state, teaching girls to hate their bodies and be ignorant at the same time. The most disconcerting thing I'd heard while teaching life skills was the notion that transmissible diseases are like a game of tag. I was asked numerous times that if one had acquired immunodeficiency syndrome and gave it to another person, does that mean they're cured? Tag, you got herpes. Anyone care to take this HIV off me? So I'm not a teacher for this subject, but my little sister was 13 and my brother had just gotten married. I mentioned to my sister that I thought it was weird that my brother is going to the same cabin as my father had for his honeymoon with my stepmom. My little sister said it wasn't weird because doing the deed is only for having babies, and since my brother didn't want kids for 5 years, they wouldn't be doing the deed, and that my dad was too old to have kids, so they also never did the deed. Explaining to her that there are more reasons for doing the deed was awkward. Also, my sister-in-law, until she was 16, thought that doing the deed meant you laid side by side and the sperm crawled out of the guy's belly button and into the girl's belly button. We were all homeschooled and Christian. In case anyone's wondering, my mum never gave us any kind of growing up talk. No birds and bees, no puberty, nothing. She did put a copy of The Care and Keeping of You under my door with a note saying I should read it. It is an American Girl Company book on your changing body. Bras appeared in my drawers, but nothing was ever said. There was a steady supply of sanitary products, but I never even told her I got my period, I just figured it out. So yeah, unless you looked it up yourself, you knew nothing. I used to go to a really religious school. The girls there believed that no one actually enjoys doing the deed, it's just the media telling you you do. My friend once had a Chinese exchange for uni, and she had to look after him. In the first month, it was discovered that he knew nothing about doing the deed or how babies were made. 19 years old, by the way. My friend taught him all of this during his exchange. Anyone who doesn't know, China's culture is that adult fun and relationships come after education and the establishment of your career. The schools don't teach it, and there are stories of kids going out and parents moving them over provinces to stop them dating so they can focus on schoolwork. Don't any of these hyper-religious folks grow up on farms? I ask because, it's hard to be so misinformed about doing the deed when you're breeding animals. My girlfriend is a pharmacist and has told me some good ones. She had a girl complain about her birth control falling out, and found out that she had been sticking the pills up her hoo-ha. Also, she had several that ran out of pills early and needed to be told that only she takes them, not her and her boyfriend. And of course, she's had a few girls get pregnant and find out that you're supposed to take the pills every day, not just when you do the deed. Medical professionals. What's the craziest DIY treatment you've seen a patient attempt? I had a guy come in for coughing and shortness of breath for the past few months. His lungs sounded like absolute crap. Got a chest x-ray that looked horrible, so I did a CT scan. Radiologist called it the worst case of necrotizing pneumonia he'd ever seen. The guy had like a 15% functional lung tissue left. The patient then mentioned things had been worse after he started using a new breath freshener spray. He whipped out one of those blunt effects concentrated air freshener bottles supposed to cover up green herb smell. Labeled not for internal use. Apparently he'd been using it like Banaka spray and had already gone through 3 bottles. Paramedic here once had to explain to a family that putting lemon juice in the eyes of an unconscious patient isn't an approved treatment method. And no, it didn't work. It was an interesting moment when I had to explain why his eyes hurt, though. Smelling salts, same logic applied for seeing acids. Anesthesiologist here, we had a patient come in for I&D of bilateral deltoid abscesses. He apparently had thoughts of being a bodybuilder, but instead of lifting weights or knowing someone who could hook him up with some quality roids, he decided to bulk up using some protein powder at GNC, and mixing it with water, drawing it into a syringe, and injecting the 20 to 40 cc's directly into the muscle. If bulk was what he was going for, it definitely worked, temporarily. A rip-roaring localized infection makes you look pretty swole. They also got almost a liter of pus mixed with liquefied protein powder out of each deltoid. This also wasn't the first time he had been in for this problem. That last line kills me. Try it once, shame on you. Try it more than once, what the frick are you doing with your life? My dad had an abscess on his face. It was huge, about the size of a golf ball and horribly red. It kept getting bigger. My mum, a nurse, kept telling him to go to the doctor, but my dad was a ridiculous cheapskate. One day when she was gone, we noticed a big whitehead had formed on the abscess, and it was apparently ready to pop. My dad went out to the garage, got his shop vac, placed it over the whitehead, and proceeded to suck out the abscess. It worked surprisingly well and healed up after that nicely. Mum was still furious, though. It's a pity these medical stories tend to do quite well on the channel, because these are also the ones that leave the narrator dry heaving over the side of his recording setup. This was the first one of the day to do so, although the next one admittedly took me even further. If I've learned anything from reading the stories here, it's that some people, particularly men, will tolerate almost any amount of pain to avoid a doctor seeing whatever stupid crap they've done to themselves. This is no exception. I once spoke to a paramedic who went out to a man at 2 a.m. who had excruciating pain down below. The poor organ was wrapped tightly in soaking bandages, and underneath was a blackened member with large pus-filled holes in it. The man eventually admitted that he'd shoved a chicken bone, a clean one, whatever that means, down his pee-pee hole for pleasure. Predictably enough, he couldn't get it out, and being too embarrassed to go to the doctor, he had left it until he was in so much pain he couldn't walk, both from the rotted eggplant and the fact that he hadn't been able to urinate for days. Apparently, you couldn't actually see the bone once the wound was clean, and although not an expert, my friend couldn't imagine that what was left was salvageable. In nursing school, while I was on clinical rotation in urology, there was a man who ended up having his member removed. It turned out he had an infection brewing for quite a while and thought the best course of action was placing a sock over it in the hope that it would heal. He was generally confused and upset as to why this didn't work to heal the issue. One of my first clinic patients was a guy who was injecting a mixture of testosterone, human growth hormone, sesame oil, and sunflower oil into the base of his member as a DIY enlargement therapy. Well, it got infected, so he ended up going to the ED for incision and drainage. I saw him as a post-ED visit, and at the time, he figured that he shouldn't be injecting things into his eggplant while it was healing, so instead he was injecting his oil and sketchy hormones off the internet concoction everywhere else into his body. Arms, legs, butt, shoulders, etc., because he figured it would still have some effect.
Judging by the rest of these stories, some men are capable of committing atrocious, heinous acts of terror on their own members.
There's a myth that lowering someone's core temperature will save them from an opiate overdose. As a result, many first responders have arrived on scenes to find friends or fellow users inserting ice into someone's butt. Sometimes they don't have ice though, which leads to people getting pretty inventive. Popsicles, frozen hot dogs, my personal favorite, which regrettably I didn't witness myself, it was told to me by another medic, was a bag of frozen French fries. Cold will do nothing to help someone who is overdosing on smack or other opiates. What they need is respiratory support, oxygen or artificial ventilation, and naloxone, Narcan. If you're a user or know one and somebody ODs, call 911, perform mouth-to-mouth and give Narcan if you have it, but leave the popsicles in the freezer. I work in dental and years ago had a patient attempt to superglue her front teeth back on after they broke in half. She screwed up and ended up gluing the chunk to her upper lip. I had a dental patient with a dead front tooth that had turned black, so she painted it with white nail polish daily. This happened when I was still a med student doing a rotation in the ED. The patient comes in and is pretty vague about his actual complaint, something about head pain, but he looks just fine sitting, waiting to be seen. When I finally get to see him and ask what actually happened, he removes the hat he was wearing and a chunk of skin about the size of my hand literally flaps off his skull. This man managed to basically scalp himself, and apparently it had been like that for 3 days. According to him, it was caused by falling in his bathroom and hitting his head on the toilet. He had been previously duct taping it down or using the hat to hold the skin on, but it wasn't sticking well, and that's when his wife convinced him to come to the hospital. Pharmacist here, worked in a shop where a woman asked for some advice about a potential UTI or STI. Told me she had bathed her hoo-ha in bleach for 5 minutes to try and kill any bacteria. Miraculously, she hadn't done any lasting damage. An old lady told me the rain hurt her arthritis. That's reasonable. She also swore that dog spit had healing properties, so she let her dogs lick her feet when she felt it coming on. She then wanted to show me a video of said dogs licking said feet. I swiftly and politely declined. Adult patient had gas and poked a hole in his belly button with basically a knitting needle to release it. It didn't work. He actually came in for the ensuing infection in his belly button. Oh God. I don't know what age I was before I came to the conclusion that poking holes in my body's organs was a bad idea, but it was at least a decade earlier in my life than this gentleman. The young narrator was a moron, so what does it make this man? I work in oncology pharmacy. I had a patient die of totally treatable chest cancer because they decided to treat it with mistletoe instead of chemo, all because Suzanne Summers did. Yeah, the Thigh Master Lady. Don't take medical advice from the Thigh Master Lady. The most heartbreaking thing I've seen is a desperate husband bring his wife in at death's door. They were young with 2 kids under 10. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer and didn't like what her oncologist was telling her. To be fair, that crap is terrifying. She then left the UK, so all of the chemo and surgery that was free at the point of access, and followed the alternative practices recommended by some witch doctor in her own country. By the time her husband dragged her back, she was too far gone. Had spread to too many organs, trouble with breathing, groggy, seizures from brain mets. I work in ED. I don't know how oncologists and palliative care teams do what they do. Of all the horrible traumas I've dealt with, this is one of the most upsetting cases I've ever picked up. A little late to this thread, but I have a weird one. A patient was told by her doc that she had low magnesium and should consider supplements. Not uncommon. Instead of getting MG supplements, she ate an entire tub of homeopathic volcanic ash and completely destroyed her electrolyte imbalance and ended up in ICU. We admitted her as a pharmaceutical overdose, so poison control automatically follows up with you. It was hard to explain to them. It was probably naturopathic, not homeopathic. I don't know enough about specific differences. Think of a tub of protein powder, but volcanic ash. Her husband brought it in for the poison control report. You were supposed to mix in a scoop with water for the health benefits. She ate the whole tub and had a seizure and wrecked her kidneys. The activated charcoal and volcanic ash vomit that was all over her when she came from emergency was a B word to clean up. A mentally delayed woman came in septic to the ED. We did x-rays, blood cultures, urine cultures, the works. Finally found this weird image on her pelvis film, and we had the gyn come in to do a pelvic exam. They pulled out this blob with bones in it. Y'all, I swear to God, it was a decomposing frog. She put it in her hoo-ha for safekeeping. She got toxic shock syndrome from a frog.
Ribbited for her pleasure.
My boss is a nurse practitioner. I asked her what the worst thing she had witnessed was. She continued on to tell the story of a man who had stapled his ball bag together onto his body after slipping with the razor. He had had it that way for days, metal holding his poor testes in place, infected and gross as you'd expect, before he came in to a professional. Later admitted his ex had attempted to castrate him. The organs lived, never fear. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A guy came into the ED because his leg was swollen. I'm talking like twice the size of his other leg. It turned out that his fourth and fifth toes were getting caught on his sock, which to be fair sounds kind of annoying. So he cut them the frick off with scissors. And then, surprise, it got infected. And he waited, and that's how he lost his entire fricking leg. Had a young teenager with sickle cell disease who had been in the hospital for around a week, already who decided to manage his pain himself. This was a few years ago, but I caught him pretending to take his meds. He would cock his head back and gesture that the pill went into his mouth, but really he either kept it in his hand or he threw the pill behind his back and landed somewhere in his bed. He was also quite a talker, which I then assumed was a tactic to try and distract me. I kept seeing his odd behavior and caught him doing this 2 to 3 times by the middle of the shift, so I was definitely onto him. He had a PICC line, which is essentially a long IV where the tubing goes all the way to your heart, in his left arm. And I noticed it was quite a bit more swollen compared to his other arm. Sometimes clots can happen in PICC lines, so that was my biggest concern at first. But the line was drawing blood fine, so I knew it wasn't clotted off. I told the doc, then I drew blood from his PICC line and sent it down to the lab to be cultured to see if there was any bacteria. Lo and behold, it came back positive for bacteria that's commonly found in tap water, and usually not a source of infection in the infected PICC lines. Fast forward a few hours later, he confessed that with any oral medication, pill form, he can slip by the nurses, he saved for later in order to crush it up himself to try to dissolve it with sink water in the bathroom. Every room had a private bathroom, so he could inject it in himself via his PICC line. Having once seen a commercial that oatmeal can lower cholesterol, a patient started having chest pains and tried to resolve it with a bowl of oatmeal. We had a guy come in with an abscess on his right thumb. When I asked him what happened to his hand, he told me about his recent deep-sea fishing trip and was given the responsibility of cutting the fish with an open wound in his hand. A sliver of fish got in there and became infected as it healed, so this guy gets the bright idea of doing a little DIY wound drainage by grabbing his pocket knife and cutting it open again, leading to greater infection. Yep, I also had a smack addict cut her thumb on her broken smack pipe. The thumb was incredibly infected. She grew tired of waiting for the hand surgeon to arrive. She was in the operating room with another patient, so she bit her finger to release the pus. Then she left the hospital, cursing the staff the whole time because we're useless, etc. As a child, I got really bad sunburn. The person looking after me coated my sunburn in baby oil to help it heal and sent me back out into the sun. I realized when I was older why my mum went nuts. I have a Jamie Oliver recipe that directs me to do the same thing midway through roasting a chicken. My mater would have literally murdered if someone did that to one of her kids, crackling crispy skin in 30 minutes.
My mom once melted Vicks Vapor Rub into my tea because she thought that would help my cold. It didn't help my cold.
I know people who would do this, more than one of them. They swear by Vicks VapoRub and kinda treat it like a cure-all. My neighbor came over to borrow a chainsaw. I noticed he had a thick bandage around his arm and asked him what happened. He said he fell out of a tree last week and cut his arm. I asked if he got stitches and he said he just wrapped it up and his family was praying over it. About 4 days later, I saw his wife, and she said he was really sick and may have the flu. Came to find out he had septicemia and was dying. He died a week later of kidney failure and sepsis. Putting an adult fun toy up the butt to better reach another, larger toy. Patient used to get hard-ons in class and it embarrassed him so much that he used rubber bands to prevent it. Ended up killing the tissue in his eggplant and now he needs a catheter for life. A man who'd accidentally sliced his leg open at his workplace. He obviously figured that as surgeons use staples to close wounds, he'd cut out the trip to the hospital and DIY it with an ordinary desk stapler. Arrived in ED with a pus-filled wound with the odd discolored staple hanging off it some days later. I am not a medical professional, but my father-in-law had severe skin cancer. He basically had an open sore on his back for several years that bled and bled. We never knew about it until one day we saw a pancake-sized crater through his shirt. Went to the hospital finally, and they basically said he had cancer through his entire body at this point. His response was that he thought it was a cut that wouldn't heal and put gauze and neosporin on it. Since folks are curious, yes, he is still alive, but they didn't give him much time left. They managed to treat the wound, but the cancer spread into his organs and bones. The sad part is it could have been avoided if he just went to a doctor years prior, but that is unfortunately the common mindset in a lot of older folks. White bread soaked in milk placed on an armpit abscess to draw out the infection. They needed an IND and a couple of weeks of IV antibiotics by the time they got to us. Either that or the guy who crashed his motorbike, scraped his leg all to heck, and then decided the best course of action was to self-cauterize it on the tailpipe. Wow, stupid or not, the tailpipe guy had a set of brass ones on him. When I worked in the ER, my colleague had to see a guy with an ear problem. He had something stuck in his ear and had been trying to get it out. This wasn't a new thing, he had been trying for some time. Turns out he'd completely removed his tympanic membrane, and the bits that were stuck in his ear and that he was trying to pick out with cotton buds and hair clips were his ossicles. Enjoy! Had a patient come into the ER with a makeshift bandage on his shin. He'd fallen on rocks while hiking and had left a 3-inch long, half-inch deep gash in his leg. I go to pull the bandage off, and as I'm peeling it away, I notice the skin is completely black, and there's dark chunks of fungus falling out of the wound. It looked necrotic, like it had been left alone for a week. I look at this guy like he's crazy as he tells me the wound is only a few hours old. He's pretty proud as he explains that he created a makeshift poultice by chewing up leaves and moss, mixing it with river mud, and stuffing it into his leg. That's what all the black mossy stuff was. Hint: don't do this. My grandpa thought a leg discrepancy was causing my back pain, which was causing spasms. He put several pieces of cardboard in my shoes to try and even out my legs, which were already even. He also thinks black beans cure everything. My dad thought those pesky spasms were a pinched nerve, so he'd take me to the chiropractor, his girlfriend, to get my neck cracked whenever it happened. Seizures, people. They were seizures. My stepfather thought he had a boil of some sort on his arm a few years ago. So he did what any middle-aged dad would do, cut the sucker open and poured hydrogen peroxide on it. Turns out it wasn't a boil but a form of skin cancer. Also turns out that hydrogen peroxide doesn't do much to help with melanoma. After a lot of one-sided discourse, he went to the doctor to get it checked and treated. He's now cancer-free. Good God, how is this man one of the most sensible people in this entire grouping? I'll take this as an absolute win over the many, many men in the earlier stories who no longer have usable reproductive organs. When I was an internal medicine resident, I came across a very nice 50-year-old Dominican lady. She was very well-mannered, but one could tell she was not the sharpest tool in the shed. As I was prepping her chart for our first visit, I noticed she'd been seen by every single digestive disease MD in our hospital system. Not only that, she had had every single procedure in the book, ranging from endoscopies up both holes and culminating in an exploratory laparotomy. You're opened up to basically look inside you when we have no clue what's going on. All of this because for years she'd had one single complaint. She reported severe gnawing pain in her stomach. At this point I should mention she was Spanish-speaking only. Not only that, she had a very heavy Dominican accent, and I was the first Hispanic doctor to ever see her. My first language is Spanish, and even I had difficulty understanding her. So she comes in, and after exchanging some first-time pleasantries, I politely ask her how she's doing. Sure enough, although she was smiling and said she felt well, she pointed at her belly and said "it" was biting again, and asked for cream to kill it. At this point, I got intrigued. Her medication list only mentioned a cream used for herpes breakthroughs. The previous fellow only mentioned in his note that in every single visit, she only asked for the cream and nothing else. When I asked her what she meant by the biting and what she intended to do with the cream, she very calmly tells me she intended to stick the cream up her butt in order to kill the bird living inside her. After delving more deeply into her story, it turns out she didn't have a medical condition. Ever since she was a little girl, she believed that after eating a whole quail egg, the bird had spawned inside her and gnawed away in her insides whenever she was hungry. After a short visit to psych, she was diagnosed with a somatic-type delusional disorder. No amount of medication or psychotherapy will cure her, but she was still a fully functional mother of two who paid her taxes and had part-time jobs. I reached out to every digestive disease doctor in our hospital system once more to make sure she never receives an inappropriate invasive intervention. I've been following her for 3 years now, and she's happy as one can be, considering she has a bird living inside of her. What's the stupidest thing you've ever witnessed one of your new hires do? After more weeks of training than should have been necessary, charts, books, and explicit instructions, he ruined a $10,000 piece of equipment because he didn't load it correctly, because it, quote, took too much time. It was an industrial centrifuge. Basically, you have to try really hard to not balance it. You have to load everything on one side to blow the motor. He blew the motor. He wasn't fired then and there. He was fired about 10 minutes later when I sent him to the boardroom to review the materials while I set up the replacement, and I found him in the CEO's office watching adult content online. I walked in on it. Unless centrifuge instruction manuals involve a giant wang defiling a screaming woman, he was not doing as instructed. Also, he wasn't browsing incognito, so when I checked the browser history later, the very clearly named website was there, clear as day. I did have to explain to my boss what it was, and that was a little awkward. I didn't actually have the power to fire him, but I was so livid the words just flowed out of my mouth. Sounds like he was either a moron or he was trying to get fired. Either way, the hiring manager needs to be looked at. I worked at a convenience store and often fell into the role of supervisor or manager. My boss was on holiday when the following happened. We had a fellow working one night when a customer brought in a $5,000 winning lotto ticket. First mistake, and completely against policy, the employee opened the safe and just paid it. Nobody should know you can open the safe, especially when we worked alone at night. That should have been referred to the Lotto Corp to pay directly, or the owner could write a check. Second and worst mistake, there's little bits of paper you have to submit to the lotto folks when you pay a ticket, so your store gets the money paid back, minus a fee. He threw the paper in the garbage, which then ended up in the huge dumpster that served both us and several apartment buildings. So if I don't find this piece of paper, my boss loses the $5,000, and one or more of the employees might lose their jobs. I put bags over my shoes, grabbed a pair of dish gloves and a painter's mask, climbed a ladder and hopped in the dumpster. I started ripping bags and trying to determine what day and where it came from. Just shy of 2 hours later, I emerged with that piece of paper, followed quickly by the longest shower of my life. The idiot responsible for my dumpster dive didn't even say thank you. He wasn't allowed to work alone for some time thereafter, and he got epically chewed out when the boss came back. Honestly, that seems like the kind of thing the narrator would have done in his first few jobs, but I don't know if the guy in question could put it down to the same idiot adolescent reason that I could have back then. I once had to train some new girls who seemed to be friends at a concession stand. In the space of about an hour, they demanded they be allowed to modify their uniforms, asked if they could use our cash registers to check social media sites. Were told that customers order food, you prepare that order, and they decided that's too much work and it'd be easier to make a bunch of random orders and serve them if they happen to get ordered. But, new girls, if no one orders those things, that food goes to waste. If that happens, can we take it home with us? No. They disappeared into a storage room to check their phones and gossip. They hadn't been on duty for 20 minutes at this point. They had a popcorn fight. They just started screaming and throwing popcorn at each other while behind the counter. They were called into the manager's office and were immediately fired. They threw popcorn at the manager and then stormed out screaming about how they'd better get paid for all their work. I'm not sure they even completed 5 minutes of real work. Hey girls, let's go F with a business today. My dad found out his secretary had racked up over $45,000 in legal bills from emailing simple questions to a lawyer she was told not to talk to unless she asked my dad. He was very calm and wrote a nice email to her, and she didn't get the memo. Her response was along the lines of, "Wow, you pay your lawyer that much? I think I deserve a raise." I choose to believe it went like this. The secretary mails the lawyer, "So, what's your favorite color?" Send. Lawyer. Listen, I hope you understand by emailing me I'm charging you for my time. Also, my favorite color is green. $2,500. Oops, sorry. Do you have a PlayStation 4? Yes. $2,200. How is it? Holy crap, lady. Do you realize what you're doing? $3,000. I worked as a manager at a frozen foods production plant. I supervised the line crew. Well, one day I decided we'd start an hour early, 4 a.m., so we could finish early. Everyone comes in on time. Then I noticed one of the ladies laughing and drooling all over the pizza crusts. I just kind of ignore her at first, and then she started stumbling around. I began paying more attention to her and noticed that her eyes were completely bloodshot and her face was bright red. When I had seen her at first, I thought it was just the early hours. So I pulled her aside and talked to her, and I can taste the alcohol running off her. I send her to the break room where I can follow company policy and take her to a hospital for a blood test. I finish the things I need to do and head in there to find her. She's gone. 30 minutes later, 2 cops are at the front door. She took off, got in her car, and hit a power line 100 feet from the plant. Needless to say, she was fired and arrested within a 3-hour span. My employee took a customer's vehicle, a built '73 Corvette, out for a test drive after fixing the water pump on it. It was his first week of working for me. That car was a good buddy of mine's. My buddy worked at a local drag strip. He was not happy when he saw his own darn car with his name signed on the roof pull up to make a pass. He told the guy in tech to not let it pass, and he called me. I showed up and watched my buddy confront him about why his car was at the strip. Then I walked out of the office and told the guy he could find his own ride back home and that he no longer had a job. Was that a rough move? Maybe. Was I proud of myself? Hell yeah. Not sure what the idiot was thinking. Taking a car with a guy's name on it and a sticker for the drag strip to that drag strip, talking to the guy whose name is on the roof, I don't think he quite understood how guys work. Within the week, every mechanic around us had heard what had happened, and I heard the guy applied for a job at another shop like a month later. I doubt he was hired. I had to manage a bunch of contractors cabling the building. We had 12 of them. They were just a bunch of guys, no experience required kind of job, who applied first. Since we needed them urgently, no real interviews had been conducted. One of them was caught stealing food from the employee fridge. He did it for a week. He would even open boxes and taste what's inside before choosing the right one. The other one left for a smoke and returned 6 hours later. His excuse was that he suddenly decided to buy an iPhone and went to the city to do so. I was the assistant manager of a pizza chain. The manager hired an employee who I can only describe as a smelly moose. A big animal in your way that smells like fertilizer. He was our new delivery driver, and unfortunately 2 days into the job we caught a nasty rainstorm. He took it upon himself to pull the most fake, theatrical fall while leaving the building that I swear you couldn't script it for Life Alert without landing $1 million deal. I saw the whole thing happen. The moose didn't see me. He fell by slowly lowering himself onto his elbow, looked around for a witness to his crap show, and crying out like he'd just shattered his whole back. He immediately started chanting, "My arm! Ow! My arm! Ow! Ow!" So all of us cooks piled around him and asked why he was okay, as he was rolling all over the front entrance and all around making a scene. He finally gets up while holding his elbow, like it's been shot by a bullet overseas, and says he's fine and needs to take the night off. Okay, we say, and his mum comes to pick him up. Not 2 days later, we get slapped with a lawsuit asking that we pay for his shoulder surgery. It's a good thing that the owner lawyered up because that SOB had hurt his shoulder years before and they wanted money to help with hospital bills. Ah, America, where people do crazy, stupid stunts to be able to afford medical care. Not quite as scummy as some of the crash victims who, for the same reason, sued their rescuers in the "When Did Doing the Right Thing Horribly Backfire" video on this channel. So, my mum, retired now, was a doctor who had her own private practice. At one time, she had 2 assistants who helped her with scheduling and basic things like blood tests and paperwork. This meant that these assistants can view patient files. Mind you, that my mum and both her assistants were Vietnamese. This'll be important later. One of the assistants was younger and basically had the job because her mother was a family friend. She had a habit of slacking off and going on random smoke breaks, but my mum overlooked it because she valued her friendship with the family friend. One day, a white female patient came in. On the chart or something, it stated that she was not married but had 4 kids. While the lady was standing there checking in for her appointment, the younger assistant said in Vietnamese to the other one, "What a hussy, 4 kids and she's not married. I bet we're going to be treating her for all sorts of transmissible diseases." That was when the patient responded in perfect Vietnamese, "I'm divorced. Also, my fiancé is Vietnamese, so I know your language very well. I want to talk to the doctor now." Holy crap. From what I heard, a crap storm ensued. My mum was so embarrassed, and after seeing the patient, she got into a shouting match with the assistant. The assistant was fired on the spot. That is, after a lot of yelling, pounding, and police were threatened to be called. Eventually, karma did catch up to the assistant because it turned out she was stealing prescription medicine from the office. This was revealed when my mum and the other assistant did an inventory check. Police were actually called that time. I don't know what happened next since I was a kid when it happened, but I'd like to imagine sweet karmic justice was served. In conclusion, don't talk crap in another language. You never know who speaks it and it could send your butt to jail. I was the charge nurse on duty. One of the new graduates injected cough syrup with codeine in a woman's IV. She called me hysterical. When I got to the unit, the patient was short of breath. I called the rapid response team and she was transferred to ICU. When the team arrived, the nurse was too hysterical to answer their questions and I had to pull everything I could from her chart. After the patient was taken to the ICU, I asked the nurse how this happened. She said she was too stressed out to realize what she was doing. There are a lot of problems with this response. First, if you need help, it's okay to ask. Second, we're required to double-check that we have the right patient, right medication, right route, right dose, right time. Third, when you scan the medication, it says right there that it's oral. I felt bad for her because she was obviously sorry about it, but I felt like she needed more training. The hospital decided not to give her more training and instead wrote her up and kept her on the schedule. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
Not a manager or anything. The person was my equal, but apparently I had to babysit. Anyway, working fast food, we have all these little procedures to minimize the amount of cash in the till in case we're robbed. $50 or $100 notes don't go in the till, ever. The person working the register had been there for just over a month, so not particularly watching. He shouted out, "What do I do with a $100 note, mate?" They're rarely used in Australia. I yell back, "Same as a 50, meaning it does not go in the till. So this person brings it up on the register as a 50, gives change for a 50, and then gets teed off at the customer who's demanding another 50 in change. Then he frickin' tries to pin the blame on me. I remember working for Domino's. Delivery drivers aren't supposed to take $100 notes from customers even when the order is a mammoth one. I got into a proper shouting match with the store owner because I took 2 $100 bills from a $180 delivery order. I'm not going to refuse legal tender and reload a $180 order into my car. The worst part is knowing if I'd refused $100 when I got back to the store, I would have got given crap for refusing them. Fortunately, I was bulletproof in that job. We delivered to a really sketchy housing apartment area, and I was the only driver with the stones to go in there after dark. I manage a restaurant, and apparently it's hard as frick to keep a dishwasher. The most memorable one stole a pig's skull. It would have normally been thrown out after the chef took his customary photo, and she could have asked for it, weird as it would have been, but she stole it and put it in her backpack, which was bulging. Employees' bags were checked by management before they left. I found the skull, and the chef was mad. First person I ever fired for stealing a pig's skull. My dad is the manager of a car dealership. One of the finance managers effed up the paperwork and had to redo it. The customer had signed the effed up paperwork. Instead of calling the customer back to re-sign the new paperwork, he thought it was a brilliant idea to sign it himself, as the customer. The customer was a lawyer. The finance manager was obviously fired. That sounds like it had the potential to be a very expensive screw-up.
I wonder if this particular lawyer was satisfied with the firing, or if he saw his opportunity to take the dealership for a monumental amount of cash and seized it with his cold, dead, lawyerly hands. If anyone reads this and worked for me at any point, they'll know exactly who I am and who this was. I used to work as an assistant manager at a small theme park over the summers during college. So I was maybe 21 or 22 and didn't give a crap about the job as a potential career. It was a tough spot to be in to manage 160 16 to 24-year-olds. This one kid was a ride attendant and a total D-bag. Rumors were he kept texting instead of watching the rides. I never caught him though, and he talked in fake accents to hit on girls while he was at work. These girls were like 14, by the way. I kept telling him to stop and to actually focus on work, and he'd always give me some "I'm so hard" teenager's response because he clearly owned the world. Finally, on his last day, a family comes up to me, teed off. Mum, dad, and 3 kids, who were also Australian. Turns out the kid was talking to them in a fake Australian accent and kept saying derogatory things to the family because he thought they were also talking in a fake accent. I leveled with them and said I can't stand the kid because he's a butthole and to come with me. I'll get them to the front of whatever ride they all wanted to get on. Yeah, even the parents, because parents like rides too. I walk up to the platform where the kid is texting again and go up to him. "Do you not understand company policy?" He was smirking and said, "What, you're gonna fire me on my last day?" I grabbed his badge, threw it about 140 feet into the woods. "Yeah, I am. Get the frick out." A few people waiting to get on the ride started clapping. Best day of my summer that year. I had to manage a Target cafe one year because our manager had a stroke. Anyway, one tool would not wash anything. I'd go to Pan Pizzas and find the pans on the shelf were slimy with grease, gelatinous bread and cheese mixtures, and smelled like death every time I worked with him. I'd tell him to do his crap, get upper management in, but they didn't give a crap, so he'd go back to watching his anime on his PSP instead of working. He was the laziest freaking piece of crap I've ever had the misfortune to meet, and they wouldn't fire him. Oh my god, seriously. He caused us to have bad health scores. It still makes my skin crawl. I caught him throwing pans in the trash instead of washing them before our manager finally came back. Bless that man. He barred that moron from our area and crawled up the management's pee-pee holes for not supporting me. It's been 4 years and I still hate that colossal moron with every fiber of my being. I used to manage a gas station and convenience store. I started my day at 5 a.m. and I had a second shift person call out, so I was stuck there till 10 p.m. Or so I thought. About 30 minutes before my third-party person was supposed to start, he also called out. I was stuck there for a total of 23 hours without a single break before a manager from another store came in to relieve me. Before I left, I called my regional manager and told him and his company to go and F themselves, and I quit.
Okay, this is simple, but it has to be done this exact way, so here's the instruction page. Follow these 4 steps exactly. Now, let's practice a few times. Practiced a few times? Okay, great. Show me how to do it. They demonstrate the steps. Do you have any questions about how to do this?
Nah, I'm good.
Okay, if you get lost, just grab this page and follow these steps.
Yeah, no problem.
2 weeks later, discover a huge problem. Why was it done this way?
Well, I didn't really know how to do it.
Grabs page. You follow these steps, and anyways, you demonstrated it and told me you were good to do it. Why didn't you bother to pull out this page or ask for more help?
Well, I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing.
But you clearly didn't know. I swear to God, I almost slapped her. Follow the 4 freaking steps in front of you. I was night manager at a gas station at 19, and my boss hired a D-bag for me to train. I swear he cared more about his appearance in his blue jumpsuit than doing any real work. On the phone with his crew most of the shift, cars lined up at full serve while he was inside checking his hair. One night I came in to close the store only to find it closed an hour before we actually close. He had had a party at the station and was dancing on the roof of his car, holding a wine cooler in his hand while talking on his phone. Like 20 of his friends were all there with him, dancing to loud crap music and smoking green herb, while customers were honking for service. I fired him on the spot and kicked everyone out and opened the store back up to finish the shift, offering free coffee to customers who were inconvenienced. My boss sees me at work the next day and says I had no right to fire the D-bag, lets him keep his job with only a written warning and writes me up for giving away free coffee and wanted to dock it from my pay.
I quit at the end of my shift and I was told I could use them as a reference if I wanted, as I was a good worker. First reference call he got from my new job, he told them, "John has a problem following authority and makes his own rules." Ooh, I have a semi-relevant story. Used to work in a body shop. Waterborne paint was the hip new thing. We brought a new spray booth for around $50,000, including installation and shipping and stuff. The manager of the install team was a total fricking idiot. Supposedly, he had been working this job for a while and was trusted with running the operation. In the week that he was there, everything he did wrong. I could go into great detail about his shenanigans, but for the sake of keeping things short, the tipping point was when he dropped a $20,000 computer-controlled air conditioner and airflow module from 10 feet up, damn near on top of one of his own guys. Then he tried to tell us that it was still okay, even though we could clearly see damage. My boss had a lengthy discussion with the boss of the guy, and I have a feeling he's no longer employed. A new crew was brought in and finished the job with no issues at all. To be fair, if I dropped a piece of equipment that was worth that much, my first instinct might also have been to deny. But yeah, I would never hire a clumsy idiot like me for that kind of job in the first place.
I run a recruitment and headhunting agency in Sydney. One of my business developers sits there in the meeting with one of the largest marketing automation companies in the world and starts spilling secrets of a few of their competitors who we also frickin' work for. I have preferred supplier agreements with both, and this idiot thought it was okay to share this specific piece of information with the competition. I asked him to please leave the meeting. The director I was speaking to could tell I was livid and agreed not to act on the information. I had to call the other client and explain what had happened. He nearly ripped my head off, but explained this would change the relationship as he could tell I was being honest about everything. PSA clients are now exclusively mine and my business partners. When I used to work in a truck stop, I came as close as I ever did to firing someone on the spot. If you've ever been around truckers or a truck stop, you'll notice that it can be a pretty diverse lot. It's good money for those willing to do it, which includes a ton of immigrants. In my time, I'd dealt with tons of people from Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. By and large, they were great people and caused us the least amount of trouble. I always used to joke around with one of our regulars who was from India that he was torturing us when he'd warm up the food his wife would pack for him in our microwave. Some of the stuff he had was amazing and would make you hungry just from the smell. We'd hired a new cashier, and from the beginning I had the feeling she wouldn't last, but I'd give her a chance. A week or so later, while working on some crazy thing for an upcoming visit from higher-ups, she made a snide remark over our radios that we wore, but the word I stopped listening at was raghead. You see, we all wore radios with earpieces to make communicating back and forth easier. The other truck stops at our exit used the same system and occasionally you could hear them. Also, every district manager in our company and all senior management had them, as did our secret shoppers. So this was a huge deal. I pulled her into the office and told her in no uncertain terms was she to use that term or any other term like it over the radio or in person again, or she'd be out the door with no questions asked. This was her only warning she'd get on that. She ended up pulling a no-show next week on the store manager, and with what I'd told him about the radio incident, when she did call in the next day, he told her to find new employment. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.